Chapter 327. After we agreed on this, I asked him about his plan and when he wanted to go. Zhang Kanwen told me that the Shang dynasty attached great importance to sacrificial rite. Every year, there were 4 seasons of sacrificial rite. The most important festival was the Spring Festival. However, in the Shang dynasty, the Spring Festival was the winter sacrificial rites, and the time was different. The 12th lunar month was the first day of the 12th lunar month, and the Spring Festival was also held on the first day of the 12th lunar month. Festivals were closely related to the structure of society. For example, the Mongolian Naadam festival was held during the summer and autumn, when the grassland was plentiful, and cattle and sheep were everywhere. The Han people had always been an agricultural society, and the most important festival of the year was the Spring Festival, which was held during the winter. However, the most important festival wasn't the most important. To an agricultural society, nothing was more important than the spring plowing. It was the same in the Shang dynasty. That was why the most important festival of the Shang dynasty was the annual Spring Festival, which was held on the first day of the 3rd lunar month. The method that Zhang Kanwen's teacher had passed down to deal with the well ghost was to wait until the Shang dynasty's Spring Festival to enter the Zhaoge Imperial Mausoleum. Then, during the Spring Festival, when the well ghost would show up, they would kill it. I was confused and didn't know why they had to wait until then. However, since it was a method that had been passed down from generation to generation, there must be a reason. I didn't need to think too much about it. It was the 12th lunar month, and the Spring Festival was approaching. From the Shang dynasty's sacrificial rites, the Winter Festival had just ended, and there were still 2 months until the Spring Festival. I didn't need to hurry to Anyang. I asked Zhang Kanwen about his plans. After learning that he didn't have anything else to do, I invited him to stay here for a while. Then, we would go to Anyang together to deal with the well ghost. Zhang Kanwen didn't care about trifles, so he didn't refuse. He nodded and agreed. There were many empty rooms in the shop, so I arranged one for him next to mine. Zhang Kanwen didn't stay idle. He stayed in his room for the whole night. The next day, he gave me a talisman to set up a restriction talisman. This was a special kind of talisman. There was a restriction formation drawn on it. He told me that this was a kind of warning restriction. As long as I took a drop of my own blood essence and another person's blood essence, I would be able to give a warning in advance when others had malicious thoughts towards me. It was extremely miraculous. I was thrilled. When he told me to be on guard against the people around me, although I agreed, I didn't know what to do. I didn't expect that he had already helped me. I didn't decline and took the talisman. I immediately took a drop of my blood and followed Zhang Kanwen's instructions to drip it into a small circle on the talisman. Afterwards, I went downstairs to find Xie Chenghua. Without him noticing, I took a drop of his blood and also dripped it into the talisman. Xie Chenghua might have glory of consciousness initial stage cultivation, but the present was different from the past. His cultivation was far from mine. It didn't take much effort to secretly take a drop of his blood. After dealing with Xie Chenghua, I contacted Wang Yongjun and Yang Kaichen. After meeting with them, it was much easier to take their blood. However, after taking their blood, I couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Speaking of which, I was a little too petty to measure the heart of a gentleman. However, this was a matter of life and death, so it wasn't up to me. As long as they didn't betray me, I would repay them generously in the future. To make up for the guilt in my heart, I purposely gave Yang Kaichen some Tao energy and gave him 2 defensive talismans. Then, I went to Wang Yongjun's house. The geomancy of his house wasn't bad, but I still used some tricks to change the aura of his house. It would be beneficial to his health and luck. To achieve this, I even asked Zhang Kanwen to make a precious scarlet talisman for him. With my current cultivation base, I could make a red talisman myself. However, the talismans I made contained witchcraft energy. To be safe, I didn't want to take this risk. After dealing with the three of them, the police released Lu Chuanda. When I went to see Han Wennan and told him about the well ghost, I didn't mention Lu Chuanda. However, I knew Han Wennan's character. He was a member of the expert group. As long as he knew the truth, he would announce it to the public. Lu Chuanda's case would be solved. As he had been imprisoned for many days, he looked dispirited. However, when Xie Qinghua told him about the things I had done to save him, Lu Chuanda looked grateful. His complexion was much better, and he repeatedly thanked me. Although I didn't want to force him to repay me, it was a critical time, and I was glad to receive his gratitude. Of course, while we were talking about our relationship, we also had to use some tricks. I also took a drop of his blood and put it on the talisman. After that, I was free. I stayed in the feng shui shop every day to digest the witchcraft energy I had absorbed. At the same time, I studied the astral steps recorded in the death scripture. The astral steps could be said to be the most important spell in the glorious consciousness realm. It was related to combat power and cultivation realm. However, ever since I had officially entered the glorious consciousness realm, I didn't have any free time. That was why I had only learned one step of the 9-star heavenly spirits. Since I had nothing to do, I used it to study the astral step. The 9-star heavenly spirits was a combination of the Big Dipper. It was very profound and complicated. Even if I focused on studying it, I couldn't make much progress. However, I wasn't in a hurry. According to the records in the death scripture, the 9-star heavenly spirits was very powerful, especially the last 2 steps. They complemented the other 2 stars. When they were used, their power was comparable to the heavenly master's divine power. The more powerful it was, the more difficult it would be. That was why I wasn't in a hurry. While I was quietly studying the 9-star heavenly dipper, the spirit snake took the initiative to appear once. With a face full of respect, it told me that it had already absorbed most of the liquid. It reckoned that it wouldn't take long to completely absorb it. At that time, it would have the qualifications to transform into a dragon. After saying that, he looked at me shyly and asked me when I would give him Xiang Lu's blood. I was happy to see the snake spirit transform into a dragon. As for Xiang Lu's blood, since it was useless to me, I would naturally give it to him. However, his words stirred up my thoughts. That day, the snake spirit had told me that Xiang Lu's body could convert the witchcraft energy. Of course, I had the thought of converting the witchcraft energy in my body into Tao energy. However, I quickly rejected the idea. Although I was worried about the danger that the witchcraft energy would bring me, I didn't want to completely give up on it. I couldn't explain this feeling, but I understood that it wasn't because of the power of the witchcraft energy. It was because of some unknown reason. However, at this moment I wasn't thinking about this problem. I suddenly thought of a possibility. Perhaps I shouldn't be so extreme. I didn't need to convert all of my witchcraft energy into Tao energy. I just needed to convert a part of it. My Tao energy had encountered a heavenly barrier, and it was only a thin line away from glorious knowledge. If I could convert a part of my witchcraft energy into Tao energy and help my Tao energy break through the glorious knowledge realm, would the heavenly barrier be broken by itself? With that thought, I was very excited. I immediately told the snake spirit about my idea. However, the snake spirit poured cold water on me and told me that Xiang Lu's transformation was irreversible. Moreover, he couldn't stop halfway. In other words, if he were to convert it, he could only convert all of his witchcraft energy into Tao energy. It was impossible to convert just a part of it. I was discouraged and had to get rid of my whimsical idea. Then, I asked the snake spirit how to take Xiang Lu's blood. The snake spirit smiled and said, "The method is very simple. You just need to follow Yan Nanshan's method." I understood immediately. Yan Nantian had used that method to paralyze Xiang Lu for a while. We just needed to imitate him and paralyze him. Then, we could seize the chance to let the snake spirit absorb his blood. However, there was a problem. Yen Nantian had used the mouse that day. Although it was difficult to find the obsidian stone, we could always find a way. However, he had used some unknown fungi. I didn't know what they were. How could we find them? I told the snake spirit what I was worried about. The snake spirit laughed and told me, "I know what those fungi are. When I go to Yunnan, I can find them and bring them back." It turned out he had already thought of a way. If that was the case, I didn't have anything else to say. "After you finish absorbing the liquid, we can go to Yunnan." The snake spirit was even more anxious than me. "We can leave now. When we find those fungi, we'll finish digesting the liquid in his body." This was related to his transformation into a dragon. It was normal for him to be anxious. I nodded and agreed to his request. The snake spirit saw me nod and was about to leave. However, I stopped him and asked, "Can you transform into a dragon after swallowing Xiang Lu's blood? Is there anything else you need to do?" The reason why I asked this was mainly because I was considering that I would be going to Anyang with Zhang Kanwen in 2 months. Calculating the time, if everything went smoothly for the spirit snake, it would probably transform into a dragon at that time. At that time, the spirit snake would be in a rush to transform into a dragon, and the two matters might clash. The snake spirit rolled his eyes at me. "It's not that easy. After swallowing Xiang Lu's blood, he needs time to digest it. Moreover, after that, he needs to go to Luoyang." I felt strange. "Why do you want to go to Luoyang?" The snake spirit's face turned serious. "There's a place in Luoyang called the Dragon Gate. In this world, when a creature wants to get rid of its mortal body and transform into a dragon, besides cultivating, the last step is to go to the Dragon Gate and jump over it." Although the snake spirit had become a spirit, he was still the snake god. Jumping over the Dragon Gate was the first step to transform into a dragon. Chapter 328. After explaining everything to me, the spirit serpent departed. Before leaving, I wanted to give him some protective treasures. However, I hesitated for a while and decided not to do so. The snake spirit's cultivation was at the glory of consciousness realm. After absorbing the liquid, his power was infinitely close to the pinnacle of glory of consciousness. In terms of power, he was much stronger than me, so I didn't need to worry about his safety. Unless he met someone at the celestial master realm, even if he couldn't defeat them, he would at least be able to escape with his life. After the snake spirit left, my life returned to peace. The shaman energy in my body had completely calmed down. Every day, I spent all my energy on researching the 9-star heavenly dipper. On the second day after the snake spirit left, I finally succeeded in taking the second step of the 9-star heavenly dipper, which was the Merak step. The first star of the Big Dipper was called Dubhe, also known as the Yang Heavenly Wolf Star Sovereign. The second star was called Dubhe, also known as the Een Spirit Giant Gate Star Sovereign. Solitary Yang and solitary Een didn't exist, so the first 2 steps consumed a lot of energy and the efficiency was extremely low. However, after comprehending these 2 steps, the Een and Yang complemented each other, making the subsequent steps much simpler. Not long after, I comprehended the 3rd step, Fekta, the 4th step, Migres, and the 5th step, Alioth. Of course, other than the Yin and Yang complementing each other in the first 2 steps, the speed at which I progressed was related to my stabilized cultivation at the intermediate stage of glory of consciousness. As for the remaining 4 steps, opening Sun and Alcade, they could only be cultivated at the advanced stage of glory of consciousness or even the pinnacle of glory of consciousness. As for the last 2 stars, the astral steps, which corresponded to the Een star, were even more illusory. Whether one could successfully cultivate the glory of consciousness realm depended on fate. According to the death scripture, if one couldn't cultivate the glory of consciousness realm, it was normal for one to slowly cultivate it at the celestial master realm. Even though it was only these 5 steps, it was enough to make me excited. I couldn't say for sure how powerful they were without any proof. However, I had a general feeling that if I used all 5 astral steps at the same time, the power wouldn't be any weaker than Lu Qingping's righteous ruler's 7-step. The Lu family was a famous family in the field of metaphysics. The direct descendant of the Lu family would definitely not be weak. In fact, the Gangyu's 7 steps was quite famous in the field of metaphysics. But this 9-star celestial dipper was able to match the power of the entire Gangyu's 7 steps with just 5 steps. It was clear that it was extraordinary. No wonder the death scripture said that the last 2 steps, stellar concealment steps, could contend against a heavenly master. Of course, all of this is only my guess for the time being. If I want to verify it, I'll have to find someone to verify it first. If it was in the past, it wouldn't have been easy to find an opportunity to verify it. I could only test it in a real battle. But now, Zhang Kanwen was here. His strength wasn't inferior to Lu Qingping's, and when he used the Song of Righteousness, he could easily defeat Lu Qingping. It had been a few months since he started cultivating the Song of Morality, and his cultivation had also reached glorious memory later stage. Finding him to verify the power of the 9-star heavenly spirit was the most suitable choice. During this time, Zhang Kanwen didn't stay idle. Although he stayed in the shop, I didn't have many chances to see him. This fellow stayed in his room all day, saying that he was preparing for the trip to Anyang. I didn't know what he was doing all day. When I went to look for him, I knocked on the door for a long time before Zhang Kanwen answered and hastily opened the door. I raised my head and saw that large beads of sweat were flowing down his face. The collar and chest area of his clothes were also wet. I was stunned and asked him what was going on. Zhang Kanwen only replied indifferently that he was cultivating. I was puzzled after hearing that. Cultivation in metaphysics was different from training the body. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible to sweat a lot. However, each sex cultivation method was different, so I didn't ask too much. I changed the topic and briefly explained my purpose for coming here. After hearing my words, Zhang Kanwen smiled and said, "I've heard from Wenfei that your cultivation technique isn't simple. Previously in Meizhou, you were able to block Lu Qingping's Gangyu's 7 steps with a mere pressure point realm. Now that you've mastered the astral steps, its power will definitely be extraordinary. Alright, when do you think it's a good time for us to exchange pointers?" Before coming here, I had already thought about the time and place for the exchange. I immediately replied, "Tomorrow is the 30th of the 12th lunar month. Xiao Jin transforms twice at the beginning and middle of each month. He needs to go to a secluded place. The 2 of us should go there together and exchange pointers." When I introduced Xiao Jin last time, I only said that he had a restriction in his body and couldn't use his strength. I didn't tell him about Xiao Jin's transformation. Hearing this, Zhang Kanwen was stunned. However, he didn't ask anything and just nodded in agreement. After discussing this matter, Zhang Kanwen went downstairs with me and ate lunch with Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda. Afterwards, he hurriedly returned to his room. I didn't hurry to go back. I stayed behind to check the accounts with Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda. Then, I gave them a sum of money. Although they were under my control and had to work for me, I couldn't treat them like slaves even if I had a restriction. Of course, I wouldn't hesitate to give them the payment they deserve. After dealing with this matter, I gave them a holiday. During the new year, they can go home to reunite with their families. After the new year, after dealing with their family matters, we can come back and continue our business. Zhang Kanwen and I were different. They had their own families, and it wasn't appropriate for them to stay here alone during the New Year's Eve. Xie Qinghua agreed with me with a smile on his face. He repeatedly thanked me. However, Lu Chuanda hesitated for a while. "I don't need to go back for the New Year's Eve. I want to stay in the shop." I was bewildered. After asking, I learned that his parents had passed away a long time ago. He had no wife or children. Although he had a few brothers, at his age, they had already married and had children. They had their own families. It wasn't appropriate for him to go to their homes during the New Year's Eve. Even if he went back to Foshan, he would be living alone. It would be better for him to stay here and keep me company. Metaphysics was also considered cultivation, but it didn't mean to be a monk. In fact, marrying and having children was a part of one's life. It was good for cultivation. Not many people would stay single for the rest of their lives. It wasn't in line with the traditional values of China. I didn't know if Lu Chuanda had never married or if something had happened to him. I wanted to ask him, but he looked gloomy. After hesitating for a while, I didn't ask. I just smiled and nodded, asking him to stay. In the blink of an eye, it was the next day. At noon, I took Xiao Jin and Zhang Kanwen out. I wanted to call a taxi, but since it was almost the New Year's Eve, all the cars on the street had disappeared. Feeling helpless, I had to call Wang Kun. Last time, when I was helping Xiao Jin find a place to transform, Wang Kun had told me that his wife was having a baby. I had promised him that when the baby was born, I would give him a locket. However, too many things had happened recently, and I didn't have time to do that. I had forgotten about it and hadn't given him the locket until now. A few days ago, I remembered that I wanted to visit his house. But then I thought about it. It was almost the New Year's Eve. If I gave him a locket during the New Year's Eve, it would be a good time. Wang Kuen's voice was a little gloomy on the phone. I asked him to come over, and he didn't ask. He just agreed. Not long after, he drove to the shop. After Xiao Jin, Zhang Kanwen, and I got in the car, we headed to Hui Province. Although Wang Kun was a steady person, he was a lively person. Usually, when we stayed together, we would have a lot to talk about. But today, he was very unusual. He just drove and didn't say a word. I felt strange. I wanted to ask him if something had happened to him, but when I lifted my head and saw his face, I swallowed the words I wanted to ask. I furrowed my brows. Wang Kun didn't look right. It wasn't his mental state, but his face. There was an obvious dark aura. Chapter 329. The lower eyelids belonged to the children and children palace. The lower eyelids were wide and plump, like a reclining silkworm. It was auspicious, symbolizing having many healthy children. If the lower eyelids were dry, sunken, and had slanted lines, it symbolized that the children had died young or were unfilial. Did something happen to his child? I hesitated for a while and didn't ask directly. I first asked for his birth date and horoscope. Physiognomy was simple and easy to understand, but it was too general. It couldn't be used as evidence to calculate. I had to refer to the other person's fate to make a conclusion. At this moment, Wang Kun had just had a child. His child's fate wasn't stable, and he was afraid of being cursed. If I asked him if there was something wrong with his child, it would be inauspicious. Moreover, I was a cultivator. Although I hadn't reached the realm where my words were the law, my words had a certain power. If his child was fine, I couldn't guarantee that my words wouldn't affect him. Wang Kun was bewildered. However, he quickly told me his birth date and horoscope. After I memorized it, I closed my eyes to calculate. Recently, I had been studying the Big Dipper constellation's corresponding step. The Big Dipper constellation had endless functions in metaphysics. It was also similar to the Polaris divination. At this moment, the method I used to calculate his fate was the Polaris divination. According to his horoscope, Wang Kun's fate was very good. The Polaris divination was in the children and children palace. This kind of fate had 3 boys and 2 girls. Their children were outstanding, and they were tough and arrogant. Normally, it was a good fate for the later generations. However, I soon found something wrong. Besides the main star, the children and children palace also had a star of illumination. The star of illumination in Wang Kun's children palace was the Army Destroyer. The Army Destroyer was another name for the 7th star of the Big Dipper, the Alcade star. The Army Destroyer star was called the consumptive star in ancient times. It meant to destroy and then rebuild, so it wasn't considered an ominous star. However, the Army Destroyer would illuminate, and it was the opposite of the Polaris divination. It was in charge of killing the eldest son. Combining this with his physiognomy, I was certain that there was something wrong with Wang Kuan's child. Furthermore, this problem was very likely related to the inspector at his glabella. After confirming it, I opened my eyes and asked him, "Brother Wang, I told you that the child was born, and I wanted to deliver a longevity locket to him. However, I've been busy lately, so I was delayed. The child is almost 100 days old, and tomorrow is New Year's Day. If it's convenient, I'll visit him tomorrow and deliver the longevity locket to him. What do you think?" Hearing what I said, Wang Kuan's expression was obviously flustered. His hands that were holding the steering wheel were trembling. The car shook violently and with a screech of brakes, it stopped by the side of the road. It caused a series of horns to sound from the back. Fortunately, they had just left the house and hadn't gotten on the highway yet. Otherwise, this would have caused a serious car accident. I turned to look at Wang Kuan's face. At that moment, his face was pale. He mumbled a few times before saying softly with a trembling voice, "No. There's no need. My son, he shouldn't be able to use the longevity lock." He was a big man, but after saying that, he seemed to have exhausted all his energy. When he said the words longevity locket, his eyes turned red. Although I had already predicted this, I felt a little down after hearing his sorrowful words. I sighed and asked him, "I've been in the shop all this time. If you have something that you can't solve, why didn't you come to me? Even if you can't leave, you have the shop's phone number. Why didn't you call me?" I was puzzled. Wang Kuan believed in metaphysics. If something strange happened to his son, he should have thought of me immediately. Why did he choose to remain silent? Wang Kuan rubbed his eyes and revealed a bitter smile. He shook his head and said, "I wanted to come to you, but after thinking about it, I didn't come. My son didn't encounter any evil spirits. He got sick. The doctor said that it was a very serious congenital heart disease. It was diagnosed when he was born. I didn't want to give up, but facing this disease, no one can do anything. I know you have profound Taoist techniques, but no matter how profound your Taoist techniques are, I'm afraid you can't do anything about this disease, right? Actually, I came to the shop, but you weren't there. Uncle Xie said that you were busy, and he seemed to have something to do, too. I thought about it and decided not to trouble you. What he said was strange. Congenital heart disease? If that was the case, what was the Yin spirit in between Wang Kuan's eyebrows? I thought about it. Many supernatural events could harm the human body, which could lead to other diseases. No matter what, the Yin spirit in between Wang Kuan's eyebrows wasn't fake. There was more to it than meets the eye. I sighed and couldn't help but scold him. "You're really muddle-headed. It's related to my son's life. How do you know that Taoist techniques can't cure him? How do you know that it's useless to come to me?" Wang Kuan was stunned. Not only did he not get angry because of my scolding, but he also showed shock on his face. At the same time, there was also a hint of joy. He turned around and grabbed my arm. He opened his eyes wide and asked in a trembling voice, "What did you say? You can cure this disease?" I shook my head. There are many possible causes of congenital heart disease. Sometimes, even doctors can't tell what the cause is. I also don't know if Taoist techniques can cure it. However, from what I know, I'm afraid your son doesn't have a congenital heart disease. It's the evil spirit you mentioned. I can cure it. Wang Kuan had calmed down a little. However, after listening to me, his body shivered again. His eyes brightened. He asked excitedly, Really? I wasn't in a good mood. Why would I lie to you? Take 2 deep breaths to calm yourself down. Then, tell me about your son's situation. Wang Kuan's anxious expression was gone. He was full of energy now. he didn't need to calm himself down. He immediately told me about his son's situation in detail. Just like what he had said, his son was sent to the ICU as soon as he was born. The doctor's conclusion was that he had a congenital heart disease that couldn't be cured. He could only live for half a year at most. Wang Kuan, who had just become a father, was devastated. He had some understanding of metaphysics. However, it was because of this understanding that he knew metaphysics wasn't a swindler that could cure all diseases. To some incurable diseases, all methods were useless. The most trustworthy thing was still medical science. Because of this, he didn't stay at home on New Year's Eve. As soon as I called him, he came out. After listening to him, Zhang Kanwen, who was sitting in the back seat, suddenly asked me, "What should we do now? Should we go to his house first?" I pondered for a while but didn't answer him. Instead, I asked Wang Kuan about his son's condition. After confirming that his son's condition was stable and that his life wasn't in danger, I decided to follow our original plan and deal with Xiao Jin's transformation first. After all, Xiao Jin was going to transform tonight. We couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't feel at ease leaving Xiao Jin here alone. After I explained everything to Wang Kuan, although he was anxious, he didn't rush me. On the way back, he seemed to be in high spirit. He even called his wife to tell her the good news. When we arrived at Dragon Gate County, which connected Hui Province and Huyuan, I wanted to wait for Xiao Jin to transform first before sparring with Zhang Kanwen to prove the power of the 9-star heavenly spirit. However, it seemed that I didn't have the time. Luckily, we had arrived early, and it wasn't deep in the night yet. Zhang Kanwen and I found a place to have a simple sparring session. At first, Zhang Kanwen didn't use the Song of Righteousness. He chose a simple astral footwork technique that he had practiced before to fight me. However, he soon found that although his cultivation base was higher than mine, he couldn't defeat me with this ordinary astral footwork. I had only used the first 3 steps to break his astral footwork. Zhang Kanwen finally became serious and used the Song of Righteousness. However, before he started, he warned me that the Song of Righteousness was extremely powerful. Once he used it, he wouldn't be able to stop until he had finished each line. He asked me to be careful. If I found that I couldn't endure it anymore, I shouldn't force myself. I nodded in agreement. Zhang Kanwen focused and chanted, "Heaven and earth have righteousness." As he chanted, thick white smoke rose from his body. It swirled in the air a few times and then stormed toward me. Chapter 330. Although I knew that the power of the Song of Righteousness was extraordinary when I saw Zhang Kanwen defeat Lu Qingping, Tong Tong and I were there to help. I thought that the 3 Big Dipper steps would be enough to block the first line. Who knew that it wouldn't be enough? After dealing with it in a flurry, Zhang Kanwen looked at me. I took a deep breath and nodded at him, indicating that he could continue to attack. Zhang Kanwen was already prepared and immediately chanted the second line of the Song of Righteousness. Chaotic manifold form. It was the same as what I had seen the last time. It was still the same white smoke, but there were countless tiny black particles in it. They turned into a strong gust of wind that blew through the air, creating countless terrifying scratching sounds. In an instant, the ground between him and me was sliced open. It seemed to be a very powerful attack. This time, I didn't dare to be negligent. I immediately used all 5 Big Dipper steps and charged forward. The winter night was clear, and the starlight shone on the earth. As the power of the 9-star heavenly dipper burst out, the starlight in the night sky seemed to be drawn in. The starlight gathered in front of me from the northeast, forming a silver cloth that blocked the smoke that was covered in countless black particles. The cloth that was formed by the starlight was similar to the leaf magic tool in Han Wenan's hand. It was abnormally tough. No matter how the smoke attacked it, the silver cloth didn't show any signs of tearing. As the black particles collided with it, the cloth became even brighter. In the end, after the power of the Song of Righteousness was completely suppressed, the silver cloth seemed to be getting stronger and stronger. Not only did it not disappear, but it also broke into pieces. From the silver cloth, it once again turned into sharp silver rays, changing from defense to offense, fiercely pouncing towards Zhang Kanwen. The speed was so fast that it seemed to be able to tear the air, making a sharp wind-breaking sound. Zhang Kanwen's calm expression finally changed. However, he didn't show any fear and didn't retreat. Instead, he took a step forward and chanted, "Below is he you." As he spoke, the smoke and dust that had just disappeared and the particles hidden within it reappeared out of thin air. However, this time, the particles were much larger than before, and as they collided with each other chaotically, they gradually fused together to form a craggy hill of grotesque rocks. The reason why it was called a small mountain was because it was not very tall, but it was about the same height as Zhang Kanwen. Even so, the small mountain was very imposing. It was only a meter tall, but it gave off a majestic aura as it stood erect in front of Zhang Kanwen. Apart from that, the white smoke from earlier had also turned into a silvery white river that coiled around the small mountain. The raging dust and particles turned into quiet hills and rivers that were as deep as the abyss, not moving at all. At this moment, the sharp silver light that had reached this place was like a piece of iron encountering a magnet. Its trajectory was completely messed up, and it was forcefully sucked towards the small mountain. A series of clanging sounds could be heard as all the silver rays collided with the small mountain and shattered before disappearing. However, the small mountain was still standing tall and proud. After all the silver rays had disappeared, it slowly faded and then disappeared. After using the Sky Dipper twice, and the second time I used 5 steps in one go, the shaman energy in my body had been consumed by half. I was slightly panting as I closed my eyes to adjust my breathing. After the shaman energy in my body had calmed down, I reopened my eyes to see Zhang Kanwen looking at me with a burning gaze. His eyes were filled with admiration as he said, "As expected, I didn't mention that your Dao techniques are extremely exquisite. Although this Sky Dipper technique only has 5 steps, in terms of power, Lu Qingping's 7 steps of righteousness can't compare to yours." No, it's not that they can't compare, it's that there's an obvious difference. His 7 steps of righteousness can at most block the first 2 lines of my Song of Righteousness. As for you, your Sky Dipper technique is new and you haven't perfected it, but it's already enough to block 3 of my lines. After you've perfected it, I'm afraid that its power will increase tremendously. After testing the true power of the 9-star Heavenly Dipper, it seemed to be better than what I had expected. I was in a good mood as I smiled. Then, after I've perfected it, I'll come back to ask Brother Zhang for advice. At that time, I'll be able to witness the power of the 4th line of the Song of Righteousness. I was just casually saying that, but Zhang Kanwen shook his head at me. The 4th line is different from the first 3 lines. The first 4 lines are the first part of the Song of Righteousness. If the 4th line is recited, the power will change. Although your Sky Dipper technique is exquisite, and after you've perfected it, it won't be a match for the 4th line. I was stunned for a moment before I smiled. Although Zhang Kanwen was wild and unrestrained, he was still a gentleman. His words were definitely not without reason, but a kind reminder. However, his 4th sentence would cause a qualitative change in his strength. Wouldn't my 9-star Heavenly Dipper 6th step be the same? From the distribution of the Big Dipper, the first 7 stars were the Emperor stars, also known as the 7 emperors of the Big Dipper, while the last 2 stars were the auxiliary stars. However, their true power lay not in the Emperor stars, but in the auxiliary stars. The first 5 stars were extremely far away from the auxiliary stars and had no connection with each other. However, the 6th and 7th stars were extremely close to the auxiliary and bi stars. Their auras and fates were connected. The 9 stars of Heavenly Dipper, and the 9 stars of Heavenly Dipper would correspond to each other. Furthermore, the power of the 9 stars of Heavenly Dipper would increase exponentially. For example, when I used the first 3 steps, I still couldn't defeat the first line of his Song of Righteousness. However, when I used the first 5 steps, I was able to defeat the next 2 lines. With the addition of these 2 aspects, it would not be an exaggeration to say that the 6th step of the 9-star Heavenly Dipper was a qualitative change. However, I didn't say this in detail. Instead, I smiled at Zhang Kanwen and kept him in suspense. I was prepared to surprise him when the time came. After we finished exchanging pointers, it was just about time for Xiao Jin to transform. I quickly brought Xiao Jin down to the mountain valley and arranged for him to stay there. After that, I returned to meet up with Zhang Kanwen. After I returned, Zhang Kanwen curiously looked at Xiao Jin in the distance. Just as he was about to ask, Xiao Jin's body changed. He quickly rose up and became a 10-meter-tall giant with a leap. I had seen this scene many times and was already used to it. However, it was Zhang Kanwen's first time seeing it. His entire body was stunned. The question he wanted to ask me was swallowed back into his mouth. He was so stunned that he couldn't speak. After a minute, Xiao Jin had already sat down cross-legged to cultivate. Zhang Kanwen finally reacted. He turned his head to look at me and said with a wry smile, "So, the transformation you mentioned is to restore his original body. What's going on? Didn't you say that there was a restriction in his body that suppressed all of his power?" I nodded and didn't try to hide it anymore. I told him the truth. Zhang Kanwen was even more shocked. He turned to look at Xiao Jin. After a long time, he sighed and said, "It's a pity. If his power wasn't sealed, I'm afraid that even if all the heavenly masters of the Metaphysics Association joined hands, they wouldn't dare to trouble you." After he said that, I also smiled wryly. "Yeah, if that's the case, I'll directly take Xiao Jin to the Liu family to take revenge. Then, I'll find a place to cultivate in seclusion. I won't have to live in fear like this anymore." Then, Zhang Kanwen asked me, "Why is Xiao Jin's body golden? Are all living Tai Sui golden-colored?" I shook my head. I was also curious about this. I had seen several Tai Sui's corpses, but none of them had golden skin like Xiao Jin. I didn't know if the Tai Sui's skin color would change when it was alive or if Xiao Jin was special. After chatting for a while, I didn't want to miss Xiao Jin's transformation. After I explained the situation to Zhang Kanwen, I sat cross-legged and began to cultivate until Xiao Jin's transformation ended. Such a short period of cultivation wasn't enough for me to break through to a higher realm. It just made the witchcraft energy in my body more condensed. My 4-star glorious consciousness realm was becoming more stable, but I was still far from the 5-star glorious consciousness realm. I wouldn't be able to break through in a short time. On Xiao Jin's side, after these few times of cultivation, he could now maintain his form for nearly 4 hours. Compared with before, he had made great progress, but he was still far from completely breaking the restriction. As for the absorption of the true dragon vein in the jade bracelet, I asked him about it. However, Xiao Jin said that it would take at least half a year to absorb the true dragon vein. Moreover, even if he finished absorbing it, it was hard to say whether he could completely break the barrier. Wang Kun was still waiting for us outside the forest, not far away. I didn't dawdle and brought Xiao Jin and Zhang Kanwen back to Wang Kun's car. We rushed to Shenzhen's Central Hospital overnight. It was the hospital where Wang Yongjun had a private intensive care unit. Chapter 331. When we arrived at the hospital, not only was Wang Kun's wife there, but Wang Yongjun had also rushed over after hearing the news. He was waiting anxiously outside the neonatal ICU. When he saw us, he immediately came forward and pulled my hand. Bro Zhou, is what you said true? Can this child's illness be cured?" On the way here, Wang Kun had told me that Wang Yongjun didn't have any children despite his age. He had always treated him as his son. Naturally, Wang Yongjun had also treated his son as his grandson. I lifted my head to look. As Wang Yongjun asked, his eyes were moist. It was obvious that he was extremely emotional. I nodded. I can't guarantee that it can be cured, but I can confirm that the child's illness isn't caused by heart disease. Let me see the situation first. Wang Yongjun was someone who had been through a lot, so he quickly calmed down. He nodded and brought us to the ward. The full name of the ICU was Intensive Care Ward, especially the neonatal ICU. It was a sterile ward, and the patient's family wasn't allowed to enter. When we reached the ward's door, the doctor quickly came over and stopped us from entering. Wang Yongjun was rich and powerful, but in the hospital, his family members were critically ill. No matter how powerful he was, he still had to listen to the doctor. The doctor who stopped us seemed to have medical ethics. No matter what Wang Yongjun and Wang Kuan said, he didn't allow us to enter. He said that the newborn was too fragile. If we entered, we might be infected with any kind of bacteria, and it could lead to serious consequences. In a moment of desperation, Wang Kuan told the doctor that we were here to treat the child. It would have been better if he hadn't said it, but now that he said it, the doctor straightened his face and said stiffly, "You don't trust our hospital. You can transfer the child for treatment, but you can't mess around like this. As long as you're here, you have to listen to us. Of course, I don't recommend that you transfer to another hospital for treatment. We are the best hospital in the country in terms of neonatal care. Moreover, the child won't be able to withstand the torment of transferring." Then, the doctor crossed his arms. It was obvious that he was prepared to drag it out with us. Wang Yongjun and I looked at each other. We didn't know what to do. Actually, the doctor wasn't wrong. Although I didn't know much about hospitals, I knew that no one was allowed to enter this kind of sterile intensive care unit. However, the situation was special, and I couldn't explain it to a Western doctor. Moreover, the doctor was right. The child was too fragile. He had to stay in this sterile ward to survive. There was no way he could be transferred out. While we didn't know what to do, we heard a surprised voice behind us. "Mr. Zhou?" I turned around and saw a middle-aged doctor in a white coat. His hair was combed neatly as he hurried toward me. His eyes gazed at me, his face surprised. After walking in front of me, the person said to me in broken Chinese, "Mr. Zhou, long time no see. How come you have time to come to the hospital today?" He didn't wait for my answer and turned to look at the ICU ward. He suddenly understood. "Mr. Zhou, are you here to treat this child? That's great. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw that girl in a vegetative state last time. It was amazing. Will Mr. Zhou be able to cure this child this time?" His words were incoherent. At this moment, I remembered that he was the private doctor, Lin Bide, whom I had met in Wang Yongjun's intensive care unit. However, I felt a little strange. After he lost a bet with me, Wang Yongjun fired him. He was forced to give up Western medicine and study Chinese medicine. At that time, Wang Yongjun had sent someone to watch him. With Wang Yongjun's methods, this guy shouldn't have broken his promise. I turned to look at Wang Yongjun. Wang Yongjun smiled at me and said, "Dr. Lin is currently a consultant in the cardiology department of this hospital. At the same time, he is studying Chinese medicine at Shenzhen University." It seemed that Wang Yongjun wasn't that unreasonable. Lin Bide had indeed gone to study Chinese medicine, but he hadn't lost his job in Western medicine. I smiled and nodded. "That's right. I'm here to treat this child." Lin Bai didn't seem to care about the previous disagreement. He rubbed his hands excitedly and pulled me toward the ward. He mumbled, "That's great. I finally have the chance to see Mr. Zhou's magical Chinese medicine again." After 2 steps, the doctor who had blocked the way stood up again. He said to Lin Bide with an embarrassed face, "Dr. Lin, the ICU doesn't allow the patient's family to enter." Before he could finish, Lin Bide said with a straight face, he's not the patient's family. He's an authoritative expert in Chinese medicine. He's my tutor. We're going in to treat the patient. Go to the disinfection room and prepare 2 sets of isolation suit. We'll be there immediately. It was obvious that Lin Bai's position in this hospital wasn't low. The doctor hesitated for a moment. In the end, he didn't dare to say anything and left with his tail between his legs. It was true that a county official couldn't be compared to a local official. This little doctor had forced Wang Yongjun and me into a corner, but he didn't dare to question Lin Bai's words. Not long after, the doctor came back. Everything is ready. We can go now. Lin Bai turned around and apologized to Wang Yongjun. He asked them to wait outside. Then, he took Zhang Kanwen and me to the ward. When we arrived at the disinfection room, Lin Bai went to get another set of isolation suit. The 3 of us changed and disinfected. Then, we went to the ward and saw Wang Kuen's son lying on the small bed. The baby, who wasn't even a month old, had an oxygen mask over his nose and mouth. There were several tubes in his body, and he was unconscious. His face was covered in bruises. Even in his sleep, I could see the painful expression on his face. I walked over and studied his face for a while. Then, my eyes moved to his chest. Just like the yin energy in Wang Kuen's glabella, this child also had yin energy. Moreover, it was much thicker than Wang Kuen's. However, it wasn't in his glabella but his chest. I carefully extended my hand. To avoid waking him up, I directly used my Dao energy to tear a hole in his hospital gown, revealing his small chest. His skin was different from that of an ordinary child's. This child's body was covered in a greenish-black hue. However, his chest looked special compared to the other parts of his body. There was a walnut-sized black spot that looked like a birthmark. The size of a walnut wasn't that big, but on a child who wasn't even a month old, it was enough to completely cover his heart. Not only that, but the place where the black spot was also a little sunken, forming a pit. It looked as if a piece of flesh had been dug out from there. I looked at the black spot and the hole. My brows furrowed tighter. At this moment, Lin Bai, who was standing next to me, told me, "This child has a rare heart disease. It's called fetal heart hypoplasia. After he's born, the aorta in his heart isn't fully developed. The part that should be closed isn't fully closed. There's only a thin membrane there. As he grows, his body gets bigger, and his heartbeats become stronger. That's how he can circulate his blood to his entire body. Correspondingly, the pressure on the membrane will increase. Sooner or later, his blood will break through the membrane. Eventually, the aorta will explode, and he will die." It was just like what Wang Kuen had said. The doctor predicted that the time would come in half a year. I didn't really understand Lin Bai's words. I had never studied medicine, so I didn't know what it meant. At the same time, I didn't care about it. I didn't even move my eyes away. I was still gazing at the black spot on the child's chest. I didn't know why, but this shallow black hole gave me a strange feeling. It seemed this shallow hole was actually very deep, so deep that it led to an endless abyss. I even recalled the day when Yan Nantian took me and Chen Yangting out of the hole in the orchard. I had lowered my head to see the well ghost slowly emerge from the hole. Chapter 332. This restless feeling was really strong. However, after observing for a long time, I didn't find any clues. I couldn't determine what the black spots and pits meant, and I couldn't tell where the yin energy was coming from. From a metaphysical point of view, there were 3 possibilities for a living person to have such thick yin energy. The first possibility was that the person had touched something foul and was possessed. The second possibility was that the person had cultivated a special technique. The third possibility was that the person had been in contact with yin spirits for a long time. For example, the people who had experienced yin spirits would have thick yin energy on their bodies. I had considered these 3 possibilities. However, Wang Kuen's son wasn't even a month old. He couldn't have cultivated a Yin technique. Furthermore, such a young child was unlikely to come into contact with ghosts. Even if he had accidentally come into contact with ghosts, based on the density of the baleful Yin Qi on his body, it would take at least 10 to 20 years of accumulation before it could form. After eliminating these two possibilities, I focused on the possibility that the child was possessed. Being possessed by a spirit or a ghost was a very common situation. The behaviors that people usually talked about, such as being possessed, running into ghosts, hysteria, and so on, were all originally referring to such situations. Although it was a common situation, it wasn't easy to deal with it. It wasn't a disease, and the severity of the possession depended on the cultivation base of the spirit. If the child was possessed by an ordinary wandering spirit, a scream from the people around could scare it away. However, if the child was possessed by a powerful spirit or spirit, it would be troublesome. If I didn't find a cultivator whose cultivation base was higher than the spirit's, I couldn't send the spirit away. If the child was really possessed, from the intensity of the Yin energy, the spirit wouldn't be simple. I wasn't sure if I could deal with it or not. However, I wasn't in a hurry to expel it. I needed to confirm the situation first. It wasn't a problem for me. Since it was common to be possessed by a spirit, the metaphysical world had developed a simple and effective method to detect whether an otherworldly item had possessed a person or not. I turned around and asked Wang Kuan if he still had the scorching sun talisman I had given him. After getting an affirmative answer, I asked him to take out the talisman. I held it in my palm and urged my Tao energy to erase the cinnabar seal on it, leaving only a yellow talisman with a slight fluctuation of Tao energy. The yellow talisman paper was originally long. After I folded it and tore it apart, it became 2 square pieces of paper. Then, I carefully placed the 2 yellow talisman papers on Wang Kuan's son's eyelids that were tightly shut. People had 3 souls: heaven, earth, and man. The heavenly soul was a life soul. Most Yin souls only had 2 souls, the earth soul and the human soul. Due to the special nature of the human soul, it would not dissipate even after death. Thus, when a person was possessed by a Yin soul, it was usually the earth soul that was covered by the Yin soul. The heaven, earth, and man souls corresponded to the glabella, the eyes, and the baihui of a person's body. If there was a problem, these 3 spots would be the first to show signs. However, it was hard to see them with the naked eye. That was why special tools were needed to detect them. The 2 yellow talisman papers I used were tools to detect whether Wang Kuan's son's earth soul was stable or not. In fact, there were many tools that could be used for detection, and the yellow talisman paper was just one of them. Since it could absorb energy well, its detection effect was also the most accurate. Aside from that, we could also use leaves. The rounder the leaf, the better the effect. For example, the leaves of the drought golden lotus could be compared to the yellow talisman paper. If a silver soul spirit possessed a person, due to the soul's special magnetic field, the detection item would have a strange phenomenon. The specific phenomenon might be different, but the most common situation was that the detection item would spin on the eyelid. After putting the yellow talisman paper away, I stared at it without blinking. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 10 minutes. Time passed quickly, but the 2 yellow talisman papers were still quietly on Wang Kuan's son's eyelids. There was no movement at all. My eyebrows furrowed even tighter. When the earth soul was covered, the magnetic field would be extremely strong. Under normal circumstances, there would be a strange phenomenon within 3 minutes. However, there was no movement after 10 minutes. It could only mean that the situation wasn't correct. The Yin energy on Wang Kuan's son wasn't due to the possession of a spirit. However, if it wasn't because of the possession, none of the 3 situations were correct. Then, where did the Yin energy and the black pit on his chest come from? After a moment of silence, I extended my hand to retrieve the 2 yellow talisman papers. I asked Wang Kuan for the child's birth information. Since I couldn't find any clues from his body, I could only look at his fate. In terms of fate, I could only be considered a beginner. However, a child's fate was not difficult to calculate. After a few minutes, I calculated his fate. It was different from what I had guessed. Wang Kuen's son's fate was extremely precious. There were no signs of him dying early. On the contrary, his fate palaces were in the Chou and Wei palaces. They were located in the Wenchang and Wenxiu stars. It was as if the Wenxing star was protecting his life. I couldn't find any problems with his body, and his fate was so precious. What was the problem? I furrowed my eyebrows tighter. I couldn't figure out the reason. At that moment, Zhang Canwen suddenly walked up from behind and stood next to me by the bed. He looked at Wang Kuen's son and asked me softly, "Did you see anything? What's the situation?" I shook my head. I looked at the Earth Soul and the Fate, but I couldn't find any clues. Then, I turned to look at him. I suddenly remembered that he was the inheritor of Mount Wen's bloodline. No matter if it was his cultivation or cultivation base, he should have something special. Perhaps he could see something. I asked, "Did you find anything?" Zhang Canwen didn't answer me directly. After a moment of silence, he said, "I can't say for sure now. Later, help me find a ghost. Just the most ordinary kind will do." A ghost? I didn't understand. Before I could ask, I remembered that I had Li Ying's ghost with me. There was also a large part of the ghost in the jade bracelet. Since Tong Tong had woken up, she could use it at any time. I didn't ask and secretly contacted Tong Tong. I asked her to send me a ghost from the jade bracelet. As a slight cold wind blew, a hazy gray shadow appeared in the ward. Since it was daytime, the ghost's cultivation base wasn't high enough. As soon as it appeared, its body shivered and was on the verge of dissipating. I hurriedly waved my hand and released a flow of shaman energy to cover its body. The ghost's body stabilized and stood motionless next to me. I turned to Zhang Canwen and asked, "You don't need to look for it. I brought one with me. Why do you need an ordinary ghost?" Zhang Canwen didn't answer me. He just asked me to leave the ghost by the bed. Then, he turned around and asked the others to leave the ward. Even he and I walked outside. After we stood outside, Zhang Canwen stood at the door and flicked his finger. A weak flow of Tao energy shot at Wang Kuen's son, waking him up from his sleep. After waking up, Wang Kuen's son acted like any other child. He opened his mouth and cried. However, his voice was weak, which made people feel sorry for him. Wang Kuen and Wang Yongjun stood next to him. They looked more worried. However, out of respect for me, they didn't say anything. They just paced back and forth. After a long time, Wang Kuen's son's cries finally subsided. His small eyes opened. As soon as he opened his eyes, he looked to the side and stared at the gray shadow by the bed. It was the ghost. Before I could react, Zhang Canwen, who had been staring at the ghost, pushed the door open. He said in a deep voice, "Sure enough. What does he mean?" I turned to look at Zhang Canwen. After he entered the ward, he stared at Wang Kuen's son for a long time. Then, he turned to me. His tense face didn't vanish. He said to me with a solemn face, "He can see ghosts." After he said that, I reacted. When Wang Kuen's son opened his eyes, he turned to look at the ghost. It was obvious that he could see it. That shouldn't be the case. Ghosts had a real body, but not everyone could see them. For example, there were so many people in the ward, but only Zhang Canwen and I, who had reached a certain level of cultivation, could see it. Ordinary people like Wang Kuen and Wang Yongjun couldn't see it. When I called out the ghost, they didn't react at all. How could Wang Kuen's son see it? When I had just started cultivating, I could only vaguely feel the Yin energy. It was only after I reached the Earth Master realm that I could see the ghost's body clearly. Although there was a saying among the people that children could see dirty things, this saying was actually unfounded. Children were indeed more sensitive to auras than adults, but at most, they could only sense a vague aura. It was impossible for them to see it directly. Chapter 333. Not only me, but the other people at the door also heard Zhang Kanwen's words. Wang Kun was anxious. Before I could answer, he asked Zhang Kanwen, "This? Big brother, what's wrong with my son? Why did you say that he can see ghosts?" Zhang Kanwen didn't turn his head. His eyes were still staring at the child who was crying weakly. He said, "There has always been a saying among the people that people with this kind of fate have the yin and yang eyes since they were young. They can see spirits and ghosts. In fact, this saying is true, but it's very rare in reality. It's not as common as the people say." I nodded. I had also heard Zhang Kanwen saying. In fact, when he mentioned the yin and yang eyes, I also thought of this possibility. Previously, because this situation was too rare, I didn't think about it. If Wang Kuen's son really had the legendary life of a child, it would be troublesome. The life of a child didn't only mean that children were born with yin and yang eyes and could see evil things. In fact, it was just an additional function of the life of a child. The real life of a child, in the eyes of the Xian and Taoist sects, was a life form of reincarnation. It could be the reincarnation of a demon or an immortal spirit. Of course, it was more likely that it was a demon. Even if it was an immortal spirit, it was just a child who served the immortals. The real immortal spirit wouldn't possess a human body. According to the Taoist Tao Fa Hui Yuan, all the true immortals and generals don't possess a living body. If they do, they are definitely evil. While I was thinking, Wang Yongjun immediately said, "Mr. Zhang, I heard that the life of a child can be killed and banished at a young age. I wonder if Mr. Zhang has a solution?" Wang Yongjun had always been close to the Xian world, so he knew Zhang Kanwen. Zhang Kanwen was silent for a while, then gently shook his head and said, "How can something that can reincarnate and be reborn be easy to get along with? The method of killing and banishing is what Celestial Master Zhang said when he founded the Zhengyi school. With Celestial Master Zhang's cultivation base, he can naturally kill and banish it. But in today's world, where can we find a cultivator who can be compared with immortal Zhengyi?" As soon as he said that, Wang Kun and Wang Yongjun's faces instantly turned pale. They stood there in silence, their faces full of fear. My heart was heavy. Zhang Kanwen was right. It was too difficult to resolve the life of a virgin. Not to mention the two of us, even if we reached the Celestial Master level, we wouldn't dare to say that we could resolve it. And in fact, there was something Zhang Kanwen did not mention. There were different types of children. From Wang Kuen's son's performance, he was definitely one of the most troublesome children. At this moment, Zhang Kanwen suddenly walked toward the corridor outside and waved at me. I was stunned. I immediately realized that he had something that he couldn't say, so I didn't ask. I turned to comfort Wang Kun and Wang Yongjun before hurrying after him. Outside the corridor, Zhang Kanwen had already lit a cigarette and was smoking halfway. When he saw me coming over, he immediately looked up and said to me, "Zhou-yi, you should know what the life of a virgin really means, right?" I was stunned by his question. It took me a while to react before I asked him what he meant. Zhang Kanwen sighed and put out the cigarette but on the trash can next to him. Then, he said, "It seems that you don't know. The life of a virgin is said to be the reincarnation of a demon, but in fact, the person with the life of a virgin can only be regarded as a channel that connects the human world and the netherworld. The demon isn't reincarnated but uses this channel to come to the human world. When the reincarnated demon comes to the human world, it's the day the virgin dies." It was the first time I had heard of such a saying, but I immediately understood. No matter if it was Taoism or Xianmen, there was no such thing as reincarnation. Reincarnation had always been a saying of Buddhism. I don't understand the Buddhist scriptures, but from the perspective of the celestial sect, Zhang Kanwen is right. Everyone's soul is independent and is restricted by the laws of heaven and earth. It is almost impossible to go against the will of heaven and earth and reincarnate. Moreover, the life of a virgin would usually die young. If it was really reincarnation and died early, wouldn't the reincarnated thing have worked hard for nothing? Thus, Jean Canouin's saying about the channel made more sense. Although I understood him, I still didn't understand what he meant. I asked suspiciously, "You mean, as long as we can find a way to block the channel and prevent the reincarnated thing from coming here, we can save this child?" Jean Canouin shook his head. "Blocking the channel is one way, but it's impossible. You've seen the spec. The power of the reincarnated thing isn't something we can resist. I just want to tell you that no matter what this reincarnated thing is, it's definitely a perverted demon. If we let it pass through the channel, it will bring disaster to the human world. Thus, we must find a way to stop it." I didn't understand. If we can't block the channel, how can we stop it? After listening to me, Jean Canouin suddenly became silent. After a long time, he took out a cigarette and lit it up. After taking a deep breath, he exhaled a thick cloud of smoke and slowly said, "There's a way to stop it. It's not that difficult. As long as we kill this child, we can stop it." "What?" I was shocked and shook my head without hesitation. "No, we can't. Wang Kuan brought me here to save his son, but Jean Canouin suggested to kill his son. What's going on? The child is innocent. I absolutely can't agree to this suggestion." Jean Canouin wasn't surprised by my attitude. After I calmed down, he smiled wryly and tried to persuade me. "I know you can't accept it, but think about the well ghost that came from the netherworld in my sex's ancestral land. The reincarnated thing behind this child also came from the netherworld. It's very likely to be stronger than the well ghost. If we don't stop it, the consequences will be unimaginable." I became silent. Jean Canouin was right. Moreover, he was a person with a strong sense of justice. Considering the big picture, his suggestion wasn't inappropriate. However, after thinking about it for a long time, I still couldn't accept it. Everyone had the right to live. From the child's point of view, why should he sacrifice his life for the big picture? It wasn't fair. Even if the child didn't have long to live, it was too cruel for him to let his fate be decided by others so easily. After keeping silent for a long time, I lifted my head to look at Jean Canouin. I shook my head again. "No, I definitely won't agree. If I can save him, I will. If I can't, I will give up. Whatever monster or demon, it has nothing to do with me, and it has nothing to do with this child." Jean Canouin lifted his eyes and stared at me. "You experience the power of the well ghost. Have you ever thought about how big of a disaster it would be if a stronger monster or demon came to the human world?" I shook my head. "I told you, it has nothing to do with me." "You?" Jean Canouin's aura suddenly surged as he stared at me. He paused for a while before asking, "What if I insist on killing this child?" I lifted my head and met his gaze without backing down. "Wang Kuan is my friend. This child is fated with me. I will protect him." Jean Canouin didn't say anything but stared at me for a long time. His aura surged as though he would attack me at any time. I was a little confused. To be honest, I didn't want to fight Jean Canouin. It wasn't that I was afraid. In fact, with my current cultivation base, I wasn't much weaker than him. With the yin-yang yama brush, it wasn't impossible for me to defeat him. However, I had a close relationship with him and Wen Shan's family. He had even given me the yin-yang yama brush. If I really fought him, no matter what the result would be, how could I get along with him in the future? While I was in a dilemma, Jean Canouin retracted his aura. He didn't attack me but gave me a deep look. Then, he walked into the patient room. I was stunned. I was worried that he would harm the child, so I quickly followed him. When I reached the ward, Jean Canouin was already standing by the bed. However, he didn't attack Wang Kuan's son. Instead, he placed his right hand on the child's head, slowly transferring pure Tao energy to the child's body. Chapter 334. About 5 minutes later, Zhang Kanwen retracted his hand and opened his eyes. He turned around and ignored me. Instead, he said to Wang Kuan, "I can't get rid of his virginity, but I can think of a way to let him live longer. From today onwards, he has to stay by my side. What do you think?" Wang Kuan was overjoyed when he heard that. He agreed without hesitation. Then, he asked if he could visit his son in the future. Zhang Kanwen answered all of them. After they came to an agreement, Zhang Kanwen turned around and looked at the confused me. He smiled bitterly and said, "The threshold of virginity is usually between half a year old and 1.5 years old. I have a way to help him get past the threshold of half a year old. 1.5 years later, you can find a way to get rid of it, or you can help him get past the second threshold. If you can't find a way, I will still take action." Then I understood. I took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, 1.5 years. I will definitely find a way." Although I couldn't accept Zhang Kanwen's reckless way of killing, I actually understood what it meant to have an evil being from the nether realm. Zhang Kanwen had already given in, so I shouldn't push my luck. I only hoped that 1.5 years was enough for me to find a way to solve the problem. After we came to an agreement, Zhang Kanwen took off all the medical equipment from Wang Kuan's son. Then, he carefully carried him in his arms and looked at him carefully. Then, he turned to ask Wang Kuan, "Has the child given a name?" At that moment, Wang Kuan's eyes were staring at his son. His face was filled with reluctance and heartache. There was a layer of mist in his eyes as well. When he heard that, he hurriedly blinked a few times and forced a smile as he answered, "I haven't given him a name yet. According to our customs, we wait for the child to be born before the elder gives him a name. I originally asked second uncle to give him a name, but the child encountered such a thing when he was just born. We didn't have the mood to give him a name. The second uncle he mentioned was naturally Wang Yongjun." Zhang Kanwen turned his head and said to Wang Yongjun, "The child will be fine in 1 or 2 years. Mr. Wang, you should think of a name." Originally, the doctor had given the child half a year. After hearing Zhang Kanwen's words, Wang Kuan and Wang Yongjun's faces lit up. Wang Yongjun quickly nodded and pondered for a name. However, after thinking for a while, he suddenly had an idea and said to Zhang Kanwen, "I didn't study for many years in the past, so I can't think of a name in such a short time. However, this child will be staying by Mr. Zhang's side. Why don't Mr. Zhang help to think of a name? After all, he was an experienced old fox in the business." I believed that Wang that he had not studied for many years, but I didn't believe that he couldn't think of a name. The reason why he asked Zhang to give the name was to let Wang was, so that Zhang could help. The reason that Kanwen had to him. And he would. And he would, and he. Wang Kuan wasn't stupid. After hearing Wang Yongjun's words, he quickly smiled and asked Zhang Kanwen to give him a name. Zhang Kanwen looked at the two of them with interest. I didn't know if he saw through their thoughts. After pondering for a while, he said, "This child was born with a hard life. I hope that he can endure these hardships. Why don't we call him Wang Li?" "Alright. We'll call him Wang Li." Wang Yongjun and Wang Kuan naturally didn't have any objections and immediately nodded in agreement. After giving him a name, Zhang Kanwen was about to leave with Wang Li. On the side, a thought suddenly appeared in my mind. I quickly said to Zhang Kanwen, "People with a child's life are all extremely talented in cultivation. Brother Zhang, since you want to keep him by your side, and your Wenshan branch has few people, why don't you take him in as a disciple?" The reason why I had this thought was similar to Wang Yongjun's. However, other than that, I had also asked Zhang Kanwen to take little Wang Li as a disciple out of my own intentions. It's true that most children don't live long, but children with a child's talent in cultivation is extremely terrifying. It's not any worse than my 4 meridians. If little Wang Li's problem is solved in the future, he will definitely be able to take over the Wenshan branch. His future will be limitless. Zhang Kanwen naturally knew about the cultivation talent of a child. After hearing what I said, he was stunned. After staying silent for a while, he didn't directly agree. Instead, he turned to ask Wang Kuan what he thought. Wang Kuan had always yearned for the cultivation world. When he heard this news, his heart was filled with surprise. How could he reject it? He quickly agreed. Zhang Kanwen finally nodded. The child is still too young now. When he's 3 years old, I will officially take him in as a disciple and teach him the spells of the Wenshan branch. After getting his confirmation, I finally heaved a sigh of relief. Although Zhang Kanwen was a righteous gentleman who always did what he said, the more righteous a gentleman was, the more he would consider the overall situation. To be honest, I was still a little worried. But now, with his words, unless it was absolutely necessary, he wouldn't give up on little Wang Li. After discussing everything, Zhang Kanwen brought little Wang Li back to the feng shui metaphysics shop with me. Since we had agreed to go to Anyang together, he would stay here for the time being and wouldn't leave for the time being. After bringing the baby back to the shop, Zhang Kanwen, Lu Chuanda, and I became nannies for the next few days. Every day we were busy feeding and changing diapers. The 3 men were as busy as a spinning top. Fortunately, with Tong Tong's help, we didn't make any mistakes. A few days later, when Wang Kuan found out that the child would stay in the shop, he excitedly brought his wife over. We finally heaved a sigh of relief and let Wang Kuan and his wife live in the shop to take care of the child. Although it seemed a little troublesome, it was not superfluous for Zhang Kanwen to insist on bringing the child with him. He would spend some time alone with little Wang Li every day. At first, he simply sent his Dao Qi into the child's body to help him consolidate and cultivate his primordial spirit. About half a month later, he began to mix some things and borrowed my yin-yang yama brush. Every day at noon, he began to paint on little Wang Li. I didn't understand his actions. After asking, I learned that it was part of the Wenshan branch's inheritance. Children couldn't actively practice it, so he used this secret method to let little Wang Li start to practice the Wenshan branch's cultivation method. That day, when I asked him to take little Wang Li as his disciple, it was just a random idea. I didn't expect that Zhang Kanwen would teach him the Wenshan branch's cultivation method. It seemed that my suggestion was just right. This secret method also lasted for half a month. After the first month, Zhang Kanwen suddenly came to me and told me that little Wang Li was now at the entry level of the Wenshan branch's cultivation method. Next, he would try to use his Dao energy to heal the damaged part of little Wang Li's heart. If he succeeded, he would be able to pass the half-year mark. It was a complicated process, and he needed me to protect him. Of course, I didn't mind and followed him to the room. After 1 month of rest, little Wang Li's spirit and temperament had changed a lot. He didn't look sickly, and he wasn't sleepy like an ordinary baby. His big, dark eyes were full of energy. When he saw me, he wasn't afraid. Instead, his big eyes blinked and curiously gazed at me. I went to tease him for a while. Zhang Kanwen asked me to sit on the chair next to the bed. Then, he sat on the edge of the bed and carefully lifted little Wang Li's clothes. He placed his hands on the black spot that hadn't changed. Then, he slowly closed his eyes. Waves of Dao energy constantly surged from Zhang Kanwen's hands, surging into the black spot on Wang Li's chest. This time, he didn't send the Dao energy in slowly like before. Instead, he sent all the Dao energy in his body in an abnormally violent manner. I was shocked as I watched from the side. I couldn't understand how Wang Li's small body could withstand such violent Dao energy. Although Zhang Kanwen said that the process was very complicated, in fact, it only took less than 5 minutes for Zhang Kanwen to open his eyes. He looked extremely tired, and his hands were even trembling as he slowly retracted them from Wang Li's chest. Wang Li's condition was very strange. He was lying on the bed with his eyes open, but he seemed to be asleep. His entire body, including his eyes, didn't move. I nervously asked Zhang Kanwen, "How is it?" Zhang Kanwen didn't answer me. Instead, he took out something that looked like a withered leaf and gently placed it in Wang Li's mouth. In a weak voice, he whispered to him, "Come, hold this leaf in your mouth. Don't move." Of course, a baby couldn't understand human language. Zhang Kanwen had just said it subconsciously. He hadn't thought that as the leaf was placed in his mouth, Wang Li's motionless eyes suddenly enlarged to a terrifying degree. His entire eye sockets were filled with black. Then, his small body shook and he sat up straight on the bed. His mouth moved slightly, and he spat out the leaf in his mouth. At the same time, he slowly turned his head and looked at Zhang Kanwen with his cold, pure black eyes. His small mouth slightly opened, revealing his pink gums that hadn't grown teeth yet. He seemed to make a sound from his throat. Chapter 335. At that moment, I almost couldn't believe my ears. Children usually learned to speak around 1 year old, and Wang Li hadn't even been 2 months old, but he had actually opened his mouth to speak. That "get lost" was clear and crisp. It definitely wasn't the mumbling of a child. It was more like an emperor who had been in a high position for a long time and had been fooled by his servant, letting out a disdainful and angry shout. I definitely didn't see it wrong. The cold and disdainful expression on Wang Li's small face was very clear. This definitely wasn't something a child should show. Not only was I scared, but Zhang Kanwen, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, had a bigger reaction. He suddenly jumped up from the edge of the bed and took 2 steps back. His hand was holding a spell, and his face was full of anxiety. Seeing his actions, I reacted and quickly took out the yin-yang yama brush. In a panic, I even took out the silver talisman that I had used to save my life. I held it in my hand and stared at Wang Li, ready to activate it at any time. Fortunately, I didn't use the talisman in the end. Wang Li's small body stood on the bed, and his cold eyes scanned between Zhang Kanwen and me a few times. Then, he lay back down and closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, the coldness and disdain in his eyes had disappeared, replaced by weakness and anxiety. He glanced at Zhang Kanwen, who wasn't far from him. His small mouth pouted and he started to cry softly. Zhang Kanwen turned his head and looked at me. The panic and fear in each other's eyes dissipated a little. Zhang Kanwen quickly returned to the bed and patted Wang Li's body a few times. He comforted him while carefully checking his condition. After a few minutes, Zhang Kanwen let out a long sigh and his expression relaxed. He reached out to hold Wang Li's small body and said softly, "Li'er, don't be afraid. It's okay. It's okay." It could be seen that although Zhang Kanwen had a big beard and looked rough and fierce, his heart was actually very soft. During this period of time, he had obviously treated little Wang Li as his disciple. Little Wang Li was very well behaved. After being comforted by Zhang Kanwen, his crying gradually disappeared. He looked at Zhang Kanwen, and after blinking a few times, he seemed to be a little tired and slowly closed his eyes to fall asleep. It seemed that he understood Zhang Kanwen's words. After little Wang Li fell asleep, Zhang Kanwen quietly got up. His face turned solemn. He waved at me and we left the room. Outside the room, Zhang Kanwen had just closed the door when I hastily asked, "Big brother Zhang, just now, Wang Li, did the spirit world's demon appear from the other side of the tunnel?" Zhang Kanwen nodded. After lighting a cigarette, he said in a low voice, "That's right. Although Wang Li hasn't reached the half-year mark yet, the black spot on his chest is the mark of that demonic creature. Through this mark, that demonic creature can temporarily project itself onto his body. But from the looks of it, that demonic creature shouldn't be able to unleash its power for the time being." That black spot was the mark? My heart sank. After pondering for a while, I asked, "Brother Zhang, did you succeed? Can Wang Li safely pass the half-year mark?" Hearing my question, Zhang Canwen's face darkened. He shook his head and said, I was about to succeed, but after the demonic creature appeared, I checked Wang Li's body again. He has returned to his previous condition. It seems that the symptoms have worsened. Worsened? Then wouldn't our efforts for the past month be in vain? My face darkened, but I still forced myself to comfort Zhang Canwen. Brother Zhang, don't worry. We didn't succeed this time. We can cast the spell again next time. Then, my expression suddenly changed as I thought of a bad possibility. The demonic creature had most likely appeared because of Zhang Canwen's spell. If the next time Zhang Canwen cast the spell, the demonic creature would appear again. Wouldn't all our previous efforts be in vain? If that's the case, how would Wang Li pass the half-year mark? Seeing the change in my expression, Zhang Canwen seemed to have guessed my thought. He shook his head and said, Don't worry. The demonic creature can't use its power for the time being. It must have used up all its energy to appear. The next time we cast the spell, the demonic creature won't appear. It won't be difficult for Wang Li to pass the half-year mark. I heaved a sigh of relief. No matter what, it was fine as long as he could safely pass the half-year mark. If he could pass the half-year mark, he would be safe for at least a year. 1 year later, Zhang Canwen and I might break through to the Heavenly Master realm. Even if we couldn't find a solution, it wouldn't be too difficult for him to pass the second barrier. However, I lifted my head and saw that Zhang Canwen didn't relax at all. His face was still terrifyingly gloomy. I didn't understand and asked hesitantly, Brother Zhang, did you find something bad? Zhang Canwen was silent for a moment. He put out the cigarette in his hand, opened his mouth, and said in a very puzzled tone, Just now, when I expelled the Yin Qi from his body, I found that the Yin Qi doesn't seem to be Yin Qi. Evil Yin Qi was not evil Yin Qi? I was confused by Zhang Canwen's words. What did he mean? Without waiting for me to ask, Zhang Canwen immediately explained, although that aura looked like Yin energy on the surface, it didn't look like it. Instead, it was similar to Tao energy. There was an indescribable feeling. Similar to Qi of the Way? How was that possible? Even if that aura was different from normal Yin energy, Tao energy and Yin energy were two completely opposite powers. Even if the Yin energy wasn't normal, it shouldn't be similar to Tao energy. I shook my head. Brother Zhang, you must have seen wrongly. How could Yin energy be similar to Tao energy? Zhang Canwen shook his head and didn't insist on his opinion. He sighed and said, I must have seen wrongly. All right, call Wang Kun and the others over. Take care of Wang Li for a while. I've used up too much Tao energy in my body, so I need to rest. Wang Li's situation isn't clear yet. You should also pay attention to the situation here to prevent any accident. He seemed to be extremely tired. After saying that, he didn't wait for my response and directly pushed open the opposite door and walked in. After he rested, I sensed Wang Li's situation. I didn't find anything wrong with him. Then, I called Wang Kun and his wife and asked them to take care of Wang Li. I returned to my room and stabilized the shaman energy in my body while diverting part of my energy to pay attention to Wang Li's situation. It was not until the next morning that Zhang Canwen came out of his room. It seemed that his Qi of the Way had been completely restored. However, he did not use his Qi of the Way to strengthen little Wang Li's corporeity today. He just went to take a look and then returned to his room. He waited silently, looking a little strange. I wanted to ask about the situation, but today was the day that Xiao Jin was transforming, so I didn't have time to ask. I brought Xie Qinghua with me and asked him to drive me and Xiao Jin to the same place where we had transformed. Xie Qinghua knew how to drive. I guessed that it was troublesome for me to use a car these days, so he especially drove his car over for the new year. He said that it was more convenient for him to help me. That way it was much more convenient. I didn't have to trouble Wang Kun every time. After I returned, I hurried to check on Zhang Canwen and Wang Li's situation. who knew that as soon as I entered the shop, I would hear arrogant laughter. I looked up and saw that the spirit snake had returned. His slender body was sitting on a chair in the middle of the lobby. He was bragging about how he had gone to the old forest in Yunnan, where he had encountered a 1,000-year-old goo insect, and how he had had an earth-shattering battle. Lu Chuanda and the little zombie were sitting in front of him. Lu Chuanda wore a flattering smile on his face as he listened to his bragging. The little zombie was looking into the distance with a dull face. He didn't react to his words at all. The spirit snake was so engrossed that he didn't notice that I had entered. Only when I used my shaman energy to pick him up and throw him to the side did the spirit snake stop talking. He opened his mouth and scolded, "Which little brat is it?" Halfway through his scolding, this fellow turned around and saw that it was me. He immediately put on a smile and said, "Io, it's you, big brother Zhou." I knew it. The hands that grabbed me just now were so strong, like a god. This little snake didn't even have the thought of resisting. I thought that the god from the heavens had descended. This fellow, when he started spouting nonsense, he was really bold and imaginative. I smiled at him. "Really? I just heard you say something about little brat." Before I could finish, the spirit snake shook his head and said righteously, "How could it be? How could it be? I just said little brat." He smiled and didn't seem embarrassed at all. He pointed at himself and continued, "I was talking about myself. I'm a little brat." I waved my hand in annoyance. "Okay, let's talk business. Why are you back so soon? Have you found all the mushrooms?" After hearing my question, the spirit snake became arrogant again. He laughed crazily. "Look at me, snake immortal. Who do you think I am? I've come here personally. Is there anything I can't solve? Here, I've found all the things I need." After saying that, he shook his tail and threw out a khaki-colored cloth bag out of nowhere. A few black fungus objects leaked out of it. I resisted the urge to beat him up. I picked up the cloth bag and carefully checked. After confirming that the mushrooms were the same as the one Yen Nantian had used last time, I felt happy. Chapter 336. The spirit snake had a mysterious background. Back then, the old goo woman called him Dragon Goo. According to him, he was a snake monster that had cultivated for 1,000 years. After his death, his soul didn't disperse. He relied on the compass to escape the laws of heaven and earth, and stayed in the human world. Initially, I believed him, but as I interacted with him for a long time, I started to have doubts. It wasn't because of the old goo woman's dragon goo, nor was it because Nangong purposely found him and returned him to me. It was because his cultivation speed was too fast. When we first met, he was at most at the dragon-seeking stage, which was similar to mine. In just a short 2 to 3 years, I reached the middle stage of glorious memory. I relied on various miraculous encounters, along with my top-notch talent of 4 meridians. My cultivation speed was shocking and I made a name for myself in the cultivation world. Even so, my cultivation speed couldn't compare to the spirit snake. I was only in the middle stage of glorious memory, while this guy was about to advance to Sky Master. Speaking of which, the difference between the middle stage of glorious memory and Sky Master was only the late stage and perfection of glorious memory. But in reality, after reaching glorious memory, every step forward was extremely difficult. There were countless people in the world who cultivated the glory of consciousness, but those who could advance to the middle stage of the glory of consciousness could be said to be less than 1 in 10. Among them, those who could advance to the heavenly master realm could be described as less than 1 in 10,000. To put it simply, the spirit snake's cultivation was far ahead of mine, which was very abnormal. Humans were the spirits of all living things, so their cultivation speed was naturally much faster than monsters. Even if monsters were born with a long lifespan, it was still incomparable to humans. Moreover, I had top-notch talent of 4 meridians, so I could be considered one of the best among humans. Yet, my cultivation speed was so much slower than that of a monster like the spirit snake. If the spirit snake didn't hide his cultivation from the start, there was only one reason that could explain this, and that was that the spirit snake's cultivation when he was alive definitely wasn't glorious memory realm, but at least sky master realm. In other words, he wasn't cultivating in the past 2 to 3 years, but recovering his cultivation when he was alive. I even felt that even if he was at Sky Master Realm when he was alive, he shouldn't be able to recover so quickly. Maybe his cultivation when he was alive was even higher than Sky Master. With that in mind, I looked at the spirit snake and couldn't help but ask, "Your cultivation speed is really abnormally fast." Before I could finish, the spirit snake interrupted, "How is it abnormal? How was it abnormal? Don't you know who I'm following?" As he said that, the flattering smile on his face deepened. He moved closer to my side and chuckled. "I'm following Big Brother Zhou. With Big Brother Zhou's care, isn't it normal for my cultivation speed to be faster?" It had to be said that this guy's bootlicking skills had not improved at all. He was always so simple and crude. I angrily pulled him aside and waved my hand, asking him to take a rest and recover his energy. "We'll talk about swallowing Xiang Lu's blood later." The spirit snake instantly became anxious. He moved closer to me and hooked his tail on the hem of my clothes. He said pitifully, "Don't. How can we talk about it later? I'm very energetic and I don't need to rest. I can even swallow Xiang Lu's blood now." I smiled at him and didn't say anything. I walked upstairs. After I went upstairs, the spirit snake followed me. He looked at me with teary eyes. Seeing that I didn't change my mind, he could only fly to my shoulder and enter the tattoo on my back. I didn't purposely stop the spirit snake from swallowing Xiang Lu's blood. I was just joking with him. Although this guy's background was mysterious, I understood him well after spending so much time with him. I wasn't worried that he would harm me after he advanced to Sky Master. On the contrary, he would definitely stay by my side. No matter how strong he was, he wouldn't show it in front of me. Of course, there was also Tong. The image of the great demon King Tong was deeply rooted in the spirit snake's heart. Even if he reached the Sky Master realm, he wouldn't dare to fight back when Tong beat him up. The reason why I wasn't in a hurry to let the spirit snake swallow Xiang Lu's blood was that I wanted to let the spirit snake rest for a while. Although Xiang Lu didn't seem to have any lethality, when Yan Nantian had captured him, he had been very careful. How could the spirit snake and I be careless? On the other hand, after swallowing Xiang Lu's blood, the spirit snake would immediately go to the Dragon's Gate. The Shang dynasty's spring sacrifice was in a month. Zhang Canwen and I had to rush there. The distance between the two places wasn't far. After calculating the time, we would depart in half a month. We would first bring the spirit snake to Luoyang. After jumping through the Dragon's Gate, we would go to Anyang. The timing was just right. Thus, it would be best to let the spirit snake swallow Xiang Lu's blood after 10 days. When I returned to my room, there was no one there. I asked Xiao Jin to stay in the room while I got up and went to Wang Li's room. Wang Kuan and his wife were there, and Tong Tong was playing with little Wang Li by the bed. As her cultivation base gradually increased, Tong Tong's body became more solid. The dark blue energy on her body also became fainter. As long as Tong Tong paid attention, ordinary people wouldn't be able to find out that she was a ghost. That was why I told Wang Kuan and his wife that Tong Tong was my little sister. They didn't doubt it and got along well with Tong Tong. I went to check on little Wang Li's situation. Then, I asked Tong Tong, "Where's Zhang Canwen?" Tong Tong told me that Zhang Canwen had been staying in his room across the street since yesterday. He hadn't come out. I frowned and felt a little uneasy. When I left yesterday, Zhang Canwen's face didn't look right. I didn't think much about it at that time, but he hadn't come to see Wang Li for 2 consecutive days. He hid in his room and didn't come out. Something must have happened. Although I was thinking about this, I didn't show anything on my face. I just smiled and asked Tong Tong to continue playing with little Wang Li. Then, I turned around and went to Zhang Canwen's room. When I reached the door, I reached out and pushed it, only to find that the door was locked from the inside. I was stunned. Before I could open my mouth, Zhang Canwen asked, "What's the matter?" His voice was still calm and steady as usual. I couldn't hear anything from it. I asked him why he was staying in his room and not coming out. Zhang Canwen replied faintly, "I'm cultivating. I need a few days." With that, there was no more life inside. I hesitated, but in the end, I didn't ask again and returned to my room. Although Zhang Canwen's performance was a little abnormal, it was common for cultivators to go into seclusion for a few days when they reached a certain juncture. It wasn't strange. The next 3 days passed, but there was still no movement from Zhang Canwen. I couldn't sit still. It wasn't a problem for cultivators to not eat or drink for a few days, but in the glory of consciousness realm, they couldn't abstain from eating. Even if they did, they had to drink a few mouthfuls of water. Zhang Canwen had already been here for 4 to 5 days. Could something have happened to him? I hesitated for a long time. In the end, I clenched my teeth and prepared to forcefully open his door. Coincidentally, when I walked to the door of his room, before I could reach out, the door creaked. Zhang Canwen opened the door from the inside and walked out. His expression was calm. Apart from his beard growing longer and his body becoming thinner, there was nothing wrong with his expression and spirit. I hesitated for a moment before getting straight to the point and asking him what happened. Zhang Canwen looked like he didn't care and shook his head. Nothing much. When I recovered my Dao Qi that day, I felt something and tried to break through to the 6-star realm. Took a few days. I was stunned. Breaking through to the 6-star realm? Zhang Canwen's cultivation speed was truly frightening. I heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly said, "Congratulations, big brother Zhang. You're not far from completing the 6-star realm. In a few days, big brother Zhang should be breaking through to the heavenly master realm, right?" Zhang Canwen didn't seem to be in a good mood and shook his head. "I didn't succeed in breaking through to the 6-star realm. Let's not talk about this. It's almost lunchtime. Let's go down and eat something." With that, he went downstairs first. I looked up at his thin back view, my heart filled with confusion. Chapter 337. I was bewildered. I carefully recalled that before Zhang Canwen hid in the room, he had performed the ritual on Wang Li to help him pass the half-year mark. Although the demon had descended and the ritual had failed, Zhang Canwen had said that the demon didn't have enough power. The next ritual would definitely succeed. Everything was normal. Why did he suddenly have such a strange appearance? I couldn't figure it out even after thinking for a long time. I followed him downstairs. I wanted to ask him again, but Zhang Canwen had already called Xie Chenghua and the others to go out to eat. When they returned, Zhang Canwen's expression didn't change. He was happily chatting with Lu Chuanda and Xie Chenghua. Everything seemed to have returned to normal. I hesitated, but I didn't ask him again. The next few days were peaceful. Zhang Canwen continued to help Wang Li consolidate his foundation and prepare for the next ritual. I also started to recall the steps that Yan Nantian had used to capture Xiang Lu. I was preparing to help the snake spirit swallow Xiang Lu's blood. To prevent any mistakes, I wrote down all the steps that Yan Nantian had used that day. After confirming everything, I arranged for Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda to help me prepare all the materials that I needed to paralyze Xiang Lu. The unknown fungi and the snake spirit had already been found, and the 5 newborn mice were easy to find. These were not a problem. However, in addition to this, they also needed 5 obsidian stones with different attributes of the 5 elements. This was not something that could be found easily. Fortunately, I had gotten 3rd place in the Metaphysics Society's competition and obtained 10 pieces of bright stones. Many things had happened and I had encountered many dangers. However, I had kept the 10 stones with me and hadn't lost them. All 10 of them had fire properties, so I naturally couldn't use them directly. However, Yi Pianpian had told me that in the metaphysics world, stones with different properties could be exchanged. The blazing stones I had were from the fire god temple. They were of excellent quality. It wouldn't be difficult to find someone to exchange them for stones with other properties. However, my current identity was sensitive, so it wasn't suitable for me to show my face in the metaphysics world. I had to leave this matter to Xie Qinghua and the others. I called Xie Qinghua over and told him about it. Then, I gave him the 4 blazing stones. Receiving the fire obsidian stone, Xie Qinghua's face was lifeless. After a long time, he hurriedly shook his head and said, "No, no, this thing is too precious. You can't give it to me." Xie Qinghua was probably too emotional that he started to speak incoherently. After he calmed down, I asked him about it and found out that he knew where to exchange for these items. It was just that the 4 pieces of firestone stone were too valuable. It would be too eye-catching to take them out all at once. Moreover, he had only just attained the cultivation of glory of knowledge. Treasuring a jade ring would become a crime. Once he was targeted by someone with ulterior motives, the consequences would be unimaginable. So in the end, he said that it would be best for me to do it myself. He could accompany me, but he couldn't go alone. After understanding this, I hesitated for a moment. With my current situation, I definitely couldn't reveal myself in public. Even if I used the ink-changing bead, Han Wenan and the Han family's celestial master had already seen my appearance after I had changed my appearance. There would definitely be traces left behind. In the end, I had no choice but to find Zhang Canwen and tell him the reason. Zhang Canwen didn't mind and nodded without hesitation. He took the 4 pieces of firestone stone and left with Xie Qinghua. Zhang Canwen was at the later stages of glory of knowledge, close to the complete stage of glory of knowledge. His power was extraordinary and there were few who could be his match under the celestial master realm. With him around, there would naturally be no worries. After a night, Zhang Canwen returned with Xie Qinghua the next morning. After we met, he threw me a cloth bag. I opened it and saw that there were 4 pieces of firestone stone inside. After everything was prepared, I would send Xiao Jin to transform in the middle of the month. After that, I returned to the Feng Shui metaphysics shop and told Tong Tong to call the snake spirit over. I returned to my room and carefully took out the black cloth bag that contained Xiang Lu and the various materials that I had prepared earlier. After a while, Tong Tong walked in with the snake spirit. These few days, because I didn't let the snake spirit consume Xiang Lu's blood, this fellow threw a tantrum with me. After entering the room, he floated in midair and looked at the ceiling with a scowling face. He asked impatiently, "Why are you looking for your grandpa snake spirit?" Tong Tong wasn't happy with his attitude. He glared at him and raised his hand, ready to beat him up. I raised my hand to stop Tong Tong. I smiled at the snake spirit and said, "Help me feed these to these mice." Just as I said that, the snake spirit snorted coldly without thinking, "I won't do it. Don't expect Grandpa Snake Spirit to help you anymore. Let me tell you, from today onwards." And no, what did you say? Feed them to the mice? After a while, it lowered its head to look at the baby mice and the obsidian stones in front of me. Then, it became completely excited. It extended its tail and coiled around my neck. It stuck out its tongue and kissed me on the cheek. Then, it became excited and said incoherently, "Brother Zhou, big brother, why you? I knew that you wouldn't be so shameless." No, I mean Brother Zhou, you're too kind. Don't worry, this little snake will follow your lead from now on. If you tell me to go east, I won't go west. If you tell me to beat a dog, I won't chase a chicken. If you tell me to go east, I won't go west. If you tell me to beat a dog, I won't chase a chicken. I angrily pushed him to the side and pointed at the pile of materials in front of me. I won't let you beat a dog or chase a chicken. Hurry up and feed these things to these mice. After they've consumed Xiang Lu's blood, we'll head to the Dragon's Gate. Alright. The snake spirit was full of energy. He flew to the ground and carefully picked up the young mice, placing them next to the unknown fungus. Just like the last time, the young mice seemed to have smelled something delicious. They lowered their heads and crouched on the fungus, crazily devouring it. I heaved a sigh of relief. I had thought that Yen Nantian had used some secret technique to make the young mice so greedy. But now, it seemed that the young mice had been tempted by the fungus. It wasn't because Yen Nantian had used some secret technique. The snake spirit was also there that day. He understood Yen Nantian's every move better than I did. Shortly after, the young mice had swallowed all the fungus and the obsidian stones. They all turned into balls with their bellies on the ground. Their legs couldn't reach the ground anymore. I waited for a few minutes. When the fire was ready, I carefully opened the black bag with Xiang Lu's body. The mouth of the bag was facing the young mice. I held my breath and stared at the opening of the bag. At first, there was no movement. Around half a minute later, I felt a slight wind blowing in my hand. Before I could react, the 5 young mice disappeared. At the same time, I felt the weight of the bag in my hand. I immediately reacted and lifted the bag to see what was inside. Inside the bag was the remains of Xiang Lu's limbs that Chun Yangting had cut off from the mountain wall that day. The young mice were next to the limbs. Besides them, there was a thin thing that looked like a gray earthworm. It was crawling on the bodies of the young mice. One end of the worm was exposed, while the other end was stuck inside the young mouse's body. I immediately recognized it. It was Xiang Lu's real body. Yen Nantian wasn't sure how long this method could anesthetize Xiang Lu. Of course, I couldn't be careless. I didn't have time to check and grabbed the snake spirit. I directly threw him into the bag and asked him to suck Xiang Lu's blood. The snake spirit knew the severity of the situation. He didn't say anything and directly bit the gray earthworm Xiang Lu. He greedily swallowed his blood. Xiang Lu's body was really small. Let alone sucking his blood, it wouldn't take more than a few seconds to swallow him. However, it was strange that after the snake spirit had bitten the Xiang Lu, it had been swallowing him for more than 10 minutes. Then, I saw Xiang Lu's body move. It looked like he was about to wake up. I hurried to pull his tail and pull him out of the bag. The snake spirit also reacted. When I pulled his mouth, it loosened its mouth and let me pull him out of the bag. After he was completely out of the bag, I hurried to tighten it to prevent Xiang Lu from running away. Chapter 338. I was startled and stooped to pick up the serpent spirit to check. However, as soon as I touched him, I jerked my hand back. The serpent spirit's body was hot, but it wasn't a normal warmth. It was the kind of heat that burned my hand. Snakes were een animals, and the serpent spirit was a een soul body. His body was always cold, so it wasn't normal to have this kind of heat. I became tense. I endured the burning sensation in my hand and pulled the serpent spirit up. I carefully observed him for a long time. The serpent spirit was the same as an ordinary spirit. It didn't have a life soul, so I couldn't tell if he was in danger from his life soul. I thought for a while and asked Tong Tong to help me check the serpent spirit. Tong Tong was also a spirit, so she knew more about the serpent spirit's body than I did. After checking, she told me that the serpent spirit was fine. He just fainted. I guessed he couldn't bear the tremendous power in Xiang Lu's blood. After he absorbed the blood, he would wake up. I exhaled in relief. However, I was still worried. I thought for a while and decided to transfer half of my shaman energy to the serpent spirit. Xiang Lu liked to eat shaman energy. With the help of my shaman energy, the serpent spirit would have a higher chance of absorbing the blood. No one knew how long it would take for the serpent spirit to absorb the blood. I had told Zhang Canwen that we would depart in the middle of this month. It was already past the 15th. I thought for a while and decided to call Zhang Kanwen. We packed our bags and prepared to depart as soon as the serpent spirit woke up. The night passed uneventfully. On the morning of the second day, I had just finished cultivating and was about to leave when I suddenly felt a power fluctuation beside me. At first, it was extremely small, but when I turned around to take a look, the power fluctuation had already become incomparably huge. It was even similar to the feeling I had when I first saw the true dragon vein. I hurried to check. The wave of energy came from the serpent spirit. However, the serpent spirit didn't have any changes. He still closed his eyes and lay quietly on the ground. I didn't need to ask to know that the serpent spirit was absorbing Xiang Lu's blood. I didn't dare to act rashly. I carefully sat down and prepared to protect him. As soon as I sat down, the snake spirit's body suddenly swelled up. Ever since it had been taken to Yunnan by the old Gu woman, the snake spirit's body had changed from a giant python to a small earthworm. However, in an instant, the snake spirit's body had returned to its previous giant python form, occupying almost half the size of a house. I was startled. Before I could react, the snake spirit's body swelled several times. At a speed visible to the naked eye, it occupied the entire room. Due to the rapid expansion of its dark body, it even tried to surround me. I was startled. I hurried to gather my spirit energy and dashed to the door. When I arrived outside, the snake spirit's giant body had filled the entire room. Its head had poked out of the door and was right in front of me. Its eyes were still closed. It was obvious that it was still in a coma. It didn't know what had happened. Before I could pull myself together, the snake spirit's head swelled at a speed visible to the naked eye. I was startled. The spirit snake's body had occupied the entire room. If it grew bigger, wouldn't it be terrifying? Wouldn't the entire room explode because of it? No, judging from the previous 2 times it had swelled, not only the entire room, but the entire second floor of the shop would be destroyed. I felt a little lucky. Luckily, we were on an antique street and the feng shui shop only had 2 floors. If we lived in a skyscraper in the city, the spirit snake would have caused a ruckus, and things would have gotten out of hand. While I was deep in thought, the wall near the door in front of me squeaked. The door frame was deformed, and the paint on the wall was peeling off. I didn't dare to wait any longer. I hurriedly asked Xiao Jin and the zombie that had just rushed out with me to go downstairs. I rushed into little Wang Li's room. Wang Kuan, his wife, and Wang Li were all ordinary people. I was afraid that they wouldn't be able to escape by themselves. As soon as I pushed the door open, Wang Kuan and his wife were standing at the door. Wang Kuan was holding Wang Li in his arms, and the couple was looking outside in fright. I didn't have time to explain. I grabbed Wang Kuan with one hand and his wife with the other. I asked him to hold Wang Li before dashing out. When I reached the door, Zhang Kanwen also heard the commotion. When he saw that I had saved Wang Kuan and the other 2, he turned around and ran downstairs. When I also ran out, the entire second floor had almost collapsed. Xie Chenghua, Lu Xuanda, and Little Golden Pupil were standing at the door. They lifted their heads and looked at the giant body of the snake spirit. "Boss, what's going on?" asked Xie Chenghua as soon as he saw me. I shook my head. "I can't explain it now. Let's leave this place and hide somewhere far away." Then, I didn't bother to avoid arousing suspicion. I grabbed Wang Kuan and his wife and ran far away. The others followed me and ran away. I didn't stop until I reached the entrance of the antique market. I turned around and saw that the snake spirit's body was getting bigger. Even its head wasn't far from me. The snake spirit was still growing. Not only would the feng shui metaphysics shop suffer, but the surrounding houses would also be in danger. Seeing the situation, Zhang Kanwen didn't say anything and directly ran to save them. I brought the others and stayed where I was, paying close attention to the situation. Since the commotion was too big, most of the surrounding people had run outside. They craned their necks to look at the feng shui metaphysics shop and discussed in panic. This matter couldn't be hidden anymore. The only good thing was that the snake spirit was a ghost. Except for the people in our shop, ordinary people couldn't see the snake spirit's body. Otherwise, this matter would alert the metaphysics world and the government, and it would be hard to clean up the mess. Even so, it was impossible to hide it from the metaphysics world. The Metaphysics Society's Shenzhen branch wasn't far from here, and Hong Kong, which was across the river from Shenzhen, had a strong metaphysics culture. There were countless people in the metaphysics world. I was afraid that many of them would notice the strange situation here. After pondering for a while, I called Wang Yongjun and told him that something had happened in the feng shui metaphysics shop. I asked him to come here as soon as possible. After hanging up, I lifted my head to look at the snake spirit. Finally, there was some good news. The snake spirit was still growing. However, since its body was coiled up, its entire body stretched up to the sky after it left the feng shui metaphysics shop. It only pressed down on the two shops that were connected to the shop. The other shops weren't damaged. Moreover, the snake spirit was a spirit, so its body was light. The shops under its body weren't damaged at all. I exhaled in relief. However, the snake spirit's body was still growing, and it didn't seem to want to stop. I stared blankly as he covered the surrounding shops, then the entire street. In the end, his body even covered the entire antique market. Zhang Canwen had returned. Although the snake spirit had pressed down on the entire antique market, it hadn't damaged the other houses. We didn't need to save them. After returning, Zhang Canwen asked me with a serious face. The commotion was too big. What's going on? I shook my head. I'm not sure. Why don't you take them and leave first? I'll stay here and wait. Zhang Canwen shook his head. I'm afraid it will attract people from the metaphysics world. It's too dangerous for you to go alone. While we were talking, the snake spirit's body had already reached us. Left with no choice, we had to retreat. The antique market was located in a remote area. When we got out of the market, we were surrounded by a vast empty space. After the initial panic, we were able to stay calm. We didn't go far but followed the snake spirit's body. We slowly walked out of the market. This process lasted for around 10 minutes. The snake spirit's body expanded until it covered an area with a radius of several kilometers. Then, it finally stopped. I heaved a sigh of relief and was about to say something. Suddenly, the snake spirit let out a long, strange roar. It wasn't loud, but it was filled with a strange and majestic aura. As it roared, a phantom suddenly emerged from the snake spirit's giant body. This phantom was about the same size as the snake spirit. After it emerged from its body, it expanded endlessly, almost enveloping the entire sky. At that moment, the noon sun disappeared, and the entire sky darkened. Fortunately, this process only lasted for a short moment. After that, the shadow completely disappeared. The bright red sun appeared once again, and the sky became clear again. The huge body of the serpent spirit, which had spread for several kilometers, suddenly disappeared. I panicked, but I quickly sensed the snake spirit's location. It hadn't disappeared. It had returned to its original form. It was still at the ruins of the feng shui metaphysics shop. I asked Zhang Canwen and the others to wait here while I hurried back. When I reached the ruins of the shop, I saw the snake spirit's small body fly out of the shop before I could enter. Although the snake spirit could hover in the air for a long time, it couldn't fly. At this moment, it was flying. I didn't have time to be surprised. The snake spirit's eyes were still closed. It seemed it was still unconscious. Chapter 339. I felt strange. Although I knew that the snake spirit's fainting and his swelling body were the side effects of eating Xiang Lu's blood, I still found it unbelievable that he was traveling while unconscious. After hesitating for a while, I lifted my foot and followed him. The snake spirit's speed wasn't fast. I caught up with him in just a few steps and grabbed his body. Unexpectedly, the snake spirit's strength was too great. After I grabbed him, I wasn't paying attention and staggered a few steps forward. The snake spirit struggled free from my hand and continued to fly forward unconsciously. This time, I didn't go to grab him but looked in the direction he was heading. I was deep in thought. The snake spirit was heading north. The last step of the dragonization that he had told me about was to head north to Luoyang. I understood that the dragonization process wasn't something he could control. Now that all the conditions had been met, he should be heading to the place where he would transform into a dragon. If that was the case, I couldn't stop him, but I didn't feel at ease letting him go alone. Luckily, the snake spirit wasn't fast. I thought about it and decided to ignore him for the time being. Instead, I hurried back to where Zhang Kanwen and the others were. When I returned, Wang Yongjun also arrived. As soon as he got out of the car, he looked around and saw me. He anxiously pointed at the ruins of the fengshui metaphysics shop and asked me, "What happened?" I shook my head and didn't answer him. "Is there any way to cover it up and repair it as soon as possible?" Wang Yongjun looked like he was in a difficult position, but he nodded in the end. "It's not a big problem to repair it, but it's impossible to cover it up completely. The previous commotion was too big and couldn't be hidden from others. Since I was going to leave with the snake spirit soon, I didn't ask for too much. I just told Wang Yongjun to do his best to repair the place. Then, I went to talk to Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda. I told them to stay with Wang Yongjun and help him for the time being. As for the fengshui metaphysics shop, they weren't in a hurry to reopen it. After I roughly explained the situation on this side, Zhang Kanwen also finished explaining to Wang Kuen's family of 3. Wang Li was still young and the trip to Anyang was fraught with danger. I definitely couldn't bring him along. However, his virginity had been broken by half a year, so he would be fine for a year and a half. It wouldn't matter much whether he stayed by Zhang Kanwen's side or not. After everything was arranged, I urged Zhang Kanwen to leave. Although I could still sense the snake spirit's location, this feeling was limited by distance. If we dragged it out, I couldn't tell if I could sense it or not. Before leaving, I asked Tong Tong and Xiao Jin to go with me. There was no need to talk about Tong Tong, as he had never been separated from me. As for Xiao Jin, it was quite inconvenient to have him by my side. After all, he had a physical body and couldn't hide like Tong Tong. However, I didn't feel at ease leaving him here. After thinking for a while, I decided to bring him along. Just as I was about to set off, the silent zombie who had been standing at the side slowly walked over and followed behind me without saying a word. I was surprised. Shirmei had always been quiet and didn't have much presence. It wasn't that I had forgotten about him, but that his power was average. I didn't plan to bring him along this time. I planned to leave him here and let Xie Chenghua and the others take care of him. I smiled and told him my plan. Unexpectedly, Shirmei wasn't willing. He timidly shook his head and walked over to stand next to Xiao Jin. This little fellow had a good relationship with Xiao Jin. It seemed that he didn't want to be separated from Xiao Jin. I thought about it. This time, I had many things to do. It wouldn't be a bad idea to keep this little fellow and Xiao Jin company. I didn't reject him. I waved my hand and brought them along. When Xie Chenghua drove the car here, I had bought a car for the shop and let Lu Chuanda use it. This time, due to the snake spirit, we couldn't take the train, so we decided to drive our own car. I didn't know how to drive, and I didn't have a driver's license. However, Zhang Kanwen had a driver's license, so I gave him the task of driving. I followed the snake spirit's direction and led the way to the north. Since the antique city was located in the northern suburbs of Shenzhen, it didn't take long for us to reach a factory area. There weren't many tall buildings around, and there weren't many people around. It was here that we caught up with the spirit snake. We followed behind it and slowly hurried on our way. Since the snake spirit was really slow, I thought that the next few days would be peaceful. However, not long after, we heard the loud roars of cars behind us. I turned around and saw two black, high-class SUVs speeding toward us from a place far behind us. Their speed was frighteningly fast. I frowned, but I didn't pay much attention to them. I thought that they were just two bored racers. However, as they got closer to me, my face became solemn. It was because I could feel traces of Dao Qi in those two cars. At first, the traces of Dao Qi were very faint, so I thought that it was just my imagination. However, as we got closer, the ripples of Dao Qi became stronger. Not only could I clearly feel the existence of Dao Qi, but I could also tell that there was at least one person in the middle stage of glorious consciousness in each of the two cars. In a place like Shenzhen, it was rare for two people with such tyrannical power to suddenly appear. Now that they had appeared here and were rushing toward me, I almost didn't hesitate to consider them as enemies. I hastily raised my head and prepared to discuss with Zhang Canwen. At that moment, Zhang Canwen naturally noticed the two of them. Before I could say anything, he raised his hand to signal me not to talk. Then, he continued to drive the car forward at an extremely slow speed. Not long after, the two off-road vehicles overtook our car. Two ear-piercing braking sounds resounded at the same time. The two cars stopped in front of us, one on the left and the other on the right. There was no need to guess anymore. The two of them were definitely coming for me. They were just two middle stage of glorious consciousness, so I didn't fear them. Just as I was about to push open the car door, Zhang Canwen stopped me and told me to calm down. I didn't understand, but I didn't ask. I stayed in the car and observed the movements of the two cars in front of me. At that moment, the people in the car had already pushed open the door and walked out. I looked through the window and was shocked. One person came down from each car, and I recognized both of them. The person who came down from the first car was a handsome young man. It was Lu Qingping, who Zhang Canwen and I had worked together to deal with. The person who came down from the second car was Vice President Dan Feng, who was in charge of the Young Phoenix gathering with Yang Shilong when I went to the headquarters of the Metaphysics Society to participate in the Young Phoenix gathering. Why did the two of them suddenly come here? I subconsciously thought that they must have noticed my tracks and were prepared to deal with me. However, thinking about it, I immediately felt that it wasn't right. Previously in the underground cave, the Han family's celestial master had seen me, and he had personally seen me fight against Han Wunan and Chen Yangting. The power that I had displayed was at least at the middle stage of glorious consciousness. If the Metaphysics Society had really found my tracks, they definitely wouldn't have sent just the two of them to deal with me. While I was thinking, I saw Dan Feng and Lu Qingping get out of the car. They didn't care about us at all, but instead quickly walked towards the snake spirit. I instantly understood that the two of them must have been attracted by the huge commotion caused by the snake spirit, and followed the tracks to this place. I lifted my head to look at Zhang Canwen. He was still frowning, as though he was still thinking about the purpose of the two of them. He didn't want to act rashly. However, I couldn't sit still. The snake spirit was currently in a strange state, and it definitely couldn't be disturbed. Thus, I decided to ignore Zhang Canwen, and directly pushed open the car door to walk out. However, before I left, I made a mental note to use the EMO bead to change myself into Zhang Wenli's appearance. Then, I chased after the two of them. When I arrived in front of them, I didn't hide my aura at all. Dan Feng and Lu Qingping couldn't recognize my shaman aura, but they could tell that I was at the middle stage of glorious consciousness. After seeing me, they immediately stopped and stared at me vigilantly. I didn't care about them at all, and pointed at the phantom snake spirit in front of me. I lifted my chin and asked, "Taoist friends, could it be that you're interested in the snake spirit that I'm rearing? Why did you chase me here?" Lu Qingping didn't say anything, but Dan Feng was obviously experienced. He cupped his fists at me, and revealed his identity in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. "I am Dan Feng, the Vice President of the Metaphysics Society. It's not that I'm interested in your snake spirit, but there was a huge wave of spiritual power in the east of Shenzhen. It's related to a matter that our Metaphysics Society is investigating. We followed you here because of the snake spirit. If Taoist friend is free, you can bring the snake spirit to our Metaphysics Society. After we investigate this matter, Taoist friend can leave safely. I frowned, and the corner of my mouth instantly rose into a cold smile. What a joke! Since when has the Metaphysics Society been so overbearing? I'm not a member of the Metaphysics Society, so why should I cooperate with your investigation? My words weren't polite, but Dan Feng wasn't angry. Instead, he chuckled and continued, "This matter is very important to our Metaphysics Society. If Taoist friend can cooperate, then it's best if you cooperate with us. Otherwise, if we fall out with each other, it won't end well for you." He was quite confident. I chuckled and saw that the snake spirit had gone far away. I didn't want to waste my breath on him. I gathered my shaman energy and summoned the blood plum branch magic tool that I had obtained from Zhang Xingqing's house. I coldly said to the two of them, "Whether or not I'll end well, we'll have to try to find out." After saying that, I stepped forward with my left foot and used the 9-star Heavenly Dipper technique to guide the power of the astral steps into the blood plum branch magic tool. A scarlet light appeared in the air and swept towards Dan Feng and Lu Qingping. In that instant, the two of them revealed expressions of shock. In a rush, a scroll appeared in Dan Feng's hand. After opening it, he covered the area in front of him. Lu Qingping, on the other hand, was in an even worse state. He actually activated the white cocoon that he had used to sign up and forcefully blocked my attack. When we had ambushed Zhang Xingqing, Zhang Canwen and I hadn't been able to do anything to Lu Qingping. However, things were different now. In just a few short months, Zhang Canwen and I had grown much stronger. There was no need for Zhang Canwen to do anything. I alone wouldn't let Lu Qingping escape. Although Lu Qingping hadn't moved after taking my attack, the white cocoon around him had dimmed. It was obvious that the white cocoon wasn't invincible. As long as one's power reached a certain level, they could still break through the defensive barrier. It was just like when I had used the silver talisman to kill Lu Zhenyang. Dan Feng was in an even worse state. The scroll painting in his hand had been destroyed, and there was a gash in his chest. His face was sallow, and it was clear that he had suffered serious injuries. I looked down at the Shumei magic tool in my hand and marveled at its power. It was no wonder that Taoist Shumei had made such a name for herself. In terms of attack power, the Shumei magic tool was comparable to the Yin-Yang Yama brush. I glanced at the Shumei magic tool, then looked away. I was on guard, ready to chase after the two of them. Lu Qingping had fled the last time he had fought Zhang Canwen. He obviously wouldn't fight to the death this time. From a certain perspective, he was the mortal enemy of Mount Wen's bloodline. Regardless of whether it was Zhang Canwen or me, since we encountered him this time, we definitely wouldn't let him escape so easily. I was already prepared to chase after him. But what I didn't expect was that Lu Qingping didn't even try to escape. Instead, he stood there calmly and looked up at me. Taoist's temper is a bit too violent. I am from the Lu family in the capital. Taoist doesn't give face to the Metaphysics Association, but are you not going to give face to the Lu family? The Lu family? I sneered, not bothering to reply. I stepped forward and waved the Shumei magic tool in my hand. I answered him with my actions. This attack wasn't any weaker than the one from before. The scarlet shadow was like a giant guillotine, slashing down on Lu Qingping. I was sure that he wouldn't be able to block this attack. His white cocoon of light had already been damaged, so there was no way he could block this attack. Just as I was filled with confidence and was about to cut him down in front of me, the door of a black jeep not far from me suddenly opened, and a young man wearing a white robe slowly walked out. His movements looked slow, but the strange thing was that when he got out of the car and slowly walked to Lu Qingping, The blood shadow that I had slashed down had just gotten close to Lu Qingping's body. That young man, who looked somewhat similar to Lu Qingping and seemed to be a few years younger than Lu Qingping, merely raised his hand and casually waved it, completely blocking the scarlet silhouette. Chapter 340. At that moment I was filled with shock. It wasn't because he had easily blocked my attack, nor was it because he had recognized my identity, but it was because he had seen through my shaman energy right away. Just like how Dan Feng and Lu Qingping didn't notice when I used shaman energy. Back then, Nangong had said that only people at the Sky Master realm could notice the shaman energy on my body. In other words, this young man, who looked to be around the same age as me, was a Sky Master. Over this period of time, as my abilities have increased, I feel that I've gradually come into contact with the power of a Celestial Master. However, in reality, it wasn't until today, when I faced a Celestial Master powerhouse again, that I realized that there was an uncontrollable fear rising from the bottom of my heart. I'm still too weak to face a Heavenly Master powerhouse. I kept silent and didn't say anything. Lu Qingping and Dan Feng, who were heavily injured, exclaimed in unison. Lu Qingping pointed at me and asked in disbelief, "Big brother, he is Zhou? Big brother? Was this person from the Lu family?" I heard Lu Zifeng say that in the second generation of the Lu family, Lu Ziang's eldest son, Lu Qingyi, was also a Sky Master. Could this extremely young Sky Master be Lu Qingyi? I vaguely remembered that Lu Zhenyang was the eldest son of the Lu family. In other words, this person was Lu Zhenyang's father? My expression darkened as I raised my head to look at the young Heaven's Master expert carefully. His expression was still calm as he nodded at Lu Qingping. He waved his right hand and an unstoppable power enveloped my head. I was shocked and quickly used the energy in my body to resist. However, when I came back to my senses, the power had already disappeared. Quickly lowered my head to check on my body. Before I noticed anything wrong, Dan Feng and Lu Qingping exclaimed and their gazes towards me changed. Only then did I realize that my appearance had returned to normal. The effects of the E-ink pearl had disappeared. It should have been caused by that young Sky Master waving his hand. This mysterious method shocked me even more. I stared at the young Sky Master and secretly held the silver talisman that I had left at the Metaphysics Society in my hand. I knew very well that even with this extraordinary silver talisman, it was impossible for me to escape from a Celestial Master, especially a Celestial Master who had killed my son. However, facing Lu Zhenyang's father, this silver talisman was the only method I could use to struggle. Apart from this, I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to struggle at all. After recognizing that he was Lu Zhenyang's father, I didn't have any thoughts of escaping anymore. Lu Qingyi's gaze finally turned to me. There didn't seem to be any anger in his calm eyes. He only said faintly, "Before coming to Shenzhen, I was still hesitating whether or not to find you. I didn't think that I would meet you on my first day in Shenzhen." From a certain perspective, Lu Qingyi's resentment towards me was the same as my resentment towards Lu Zhenyang. Pushing others, I didn't have any extravagant hopes that Lu Qingyi would be merciful enough to let me off. Thus, I didn't reply to his question and only slowly circulated the shaman energy in my body, allowing my body to be in its optimal state. At the same time, I silently held onto the jade bracelet hanging on my chest. I didn't want to borrow the power of the true dragon vein in the jade bracelet, I just wanted to quietly pull it off my neck. This was a situation of certain death, so there was no need to let Tong Tong follow me to his death. Thus, I had already made my plan. When Lu Qingyi made his move against me, I would find a chance to hide the jade bracelet and try my best to protect Tong Tong after my death. After saying that, I thought that Lu Qingyi would make his move against me, but I didn't think that he would suddenly shift his gaze and stare at the car behind me. He opened his mouth and softly said, "The Taoist friend in the car, I wonder if you could show yourself?" I was stunned. At this moment, why wasn't Lu Qingyi hurrying to kill me to avenge his son? Why was he suddenly interested in the person in the car? Could it be that he had sensed Xiao Jin's terrifying aura and thought that there was an extremely powerful person in the car, so he didn't dare to act blindly without thinking? Before I could figure it out, the car door behind me opened and Zhang Canwen walked out. As soon as he got out of the car, Lu Qingyi smiled faintly and said, "Just now, I felt that your aura was familiar. I didn't expect it to be you. I didn't expect that in just a few years, you would also open that door and have a heavenly master cultivation base. Brother Zhang, congratulations. What's going on?" Zhang Canwen used to work at the Metaphysics Society's headquarters, so I wasn't surprised that Lu Qingyi knew him. But why did Lu Qingyi say that he also had a heavenly master cultivation base? Confused, I turned around to look at Zhang Canwen's body and was stunned. Zhang Canwen's aura was completely different from before. His gaze was extremely deep and his messy beard didn't look sloppy at all. Instead, he gave off an otherworldly feeling. The outline of his body was wrapped in a layer of lustrous light. Moreover, I couldn't see through his cultivation at all. I could only feel that the aura around his body was incomparably majestic and vast. This feeling I had only ever felt from a heavenly master before. My heart was filled with disbelief. Could it be that in that instant, Zhang Canwen had really crossed the threshold and stepped into the Sky Master realm? Before I could figure it out, Zhang Canwen walked past me and walked towards Lu Qingyi. When he was in front of him, he finally spoke. He completely ignored what Lu Qingyi had just said and only said coldly, "Last year, your Lu family colluded with Zhang Qingqing and nearly destroyed my Wenshan lineage. What, you've come to find me today? Are you going to exterminate me?" Lu Qingyi frowned. After a moment of silence, he shook his head and said, "It's just a coincidence that I'm here. As for what you're talking about, you know that I don't do anything in the Lu family, so I don't know anything." Zhang Canwen didn't seem to want to talk to him anymore. He smiled coldly and said, "Even if you don't know anything, you should know by now. Half a year ago, my master and junior died in the hands of your Lu family. The hatred of annihilation is absolutely irreconcilable. Lu Qingyi, you and I have nothing to talk about. Let's do it." Then, Zhang Canwen took a few steps back. When he was in front of me, he couldn't help but take the yin-yang yama brush from my hand. Then, he pressed my body and pushed me into the car. At the same time, he said to me quickly, "I'll hold him back. You drive away." I didn't react at all. I was already in the driver's seat. Zhang Canwen had already raised the yin-yang yama brush in his hand. The terrifying heavenly master realm energy on his body surged. His eyes were fixed on Lu Qingyi. The battle was about to begin. My head buzzed and I was in a daze. I bit the tip of my tongue and tried my best to stay awake. I lifted my eyes to look at Zhang Canwen one last time. Then, I quickly started the car and prepared to leave. I didn't know why Zhang Canwen suddenly had the cultivation of a heavenly master, nor did I know why he would make such a choice. However, I knew that he wanted to use his life to exchange for a chance of survival for me. No matter what, I couldn't let him down. I didn't dare to have the slightest hesitation, nor did I dare to have the slightest pause. Because I knew that if I hesitated for even a second, I might not be as decisive as I was at this moment. However, just as I started the car and was about to run away, Lu Qingyi's voice suddenly came. He said loudly to Zhang Canwen, "I'm not here to look for you today, nor am I here to look for Zhou Yi. We'll meet again." As soon as he finished speaking, I saw him call Lu Qingping and Dan Feng without hesitation and return to his car. A few seconds later, the two black SUVs started up and quickly left on the road they had come from. Lu Qingyi had left directly. I was dumbfounded. In the end, I didn't step on the accelerator with my right foot. After watching the two cars disappear at the end of the road, I raised my head and looked at Zhang Canwen with a confused expression. Chapter 341. I had escaped from death again, but I didn't feel lucky. I just felt suspicious and didn't say anything for a long time. I didn't know what Jean Canouin was thinking, but he didn't say anything either. We quickly caught up with the spirit snake. Then, Jean Canouin slowed down the car and continued to follow behind the spirit snake at a moderate pace. After 10 minutes of rushing, we were already 20 kilometers away. I turned around and sensed for a while. I didn't sense Lu Qingyi's group's aura. I guessed that they wouldn't chase after us. I heaved a sigh of relief and turned to ask Jean Canouin the biggest question in my heart. Brother Jean, have you really reached the Sky Master Realm? Jean Canouin rolled down the window and turned around. He smiled and shook his head. It's not that easy. His answer wasn't out of my expectation, but I was still suspicious. I continued to ask, but I felt your aura just now. It was clearly at the Sky Master Realm. Lu Qingyi also said that you're a Sky Master. What's going on? Jean Canouin didn't hide anything from me. He smiled and said, Do you remember the ancient book of the Song of Morality that I showed you before? I nodded. Jean Canouin continued, That ancient book is an important treasure of Mount One. It's not only because it recorded the cultivation method of the Song of Morality, but more importantly, the ancient book itself is also a treasure. Every page of the ancient book can temporarily allow people to enter the Sky Master Realm. His words opened my eyes. The ancient book of the Song of Morality had such an effect. Entering the Sky Master Realm for a short time wasn't simply possessing the power of a Sky Master, but becoming a Sky Master in a short time. Jean Canouin didn't trick Lu Qingyi, but he had really become a Sky Master. Even if Lu Qingyi really attacked him, he wouldn't be able to do anything to Jean Canouin. It was different from what I had expected. I was curious and asked him a few more questions. Then, I found out that in the ancient book of the Song of Morality, there was only one line on each page. The Song of Morality had a total of 60 lines, and the ancient book also had 60 pages. Every page could allow people to enter the Sky Master Realm for 4 hours. 60 pages of poems could allow people to enter the Sky Master Realm 60 times. I couldn't help but sigh with emotion. What kind of cultivation did Wen Tianxiang have to have been able to create such a treasure? At the same time, I was envious of Mount One. Ever since I started cultivating, I've collected quite a number of treasures and instruments. I've even gotten my hands on a true dragon's vein. However, all of them combined probably aren't as valuable as the Song of Morality. He looked at himself, and then looked at the others. Having a powerful sect with a strong background was such an important thing. Of course, this was just a momentary emotion. I felt more grateful and guilty towards Jean Canouin. After staying silent for a while, I said to Jean Canouin, In the end, you wasted such a precious thing to save me. Jean Canouin didn't seem to care at all. He shook his head and said, The Lu family and I are mortal enemies. As long as I meet them, I'll have to make preparations even if you're not by my side. What's more, this page of the Song of Morality was originally used to comprehend the Heavenly Master Realm in advance. These few days, my cultivation has temporarily hit a bottleneck, and I've been thinking about when to use this page. It was obvious that he was trying to comfort me, but I didn't say anything. I just smiled and didn't say anything. My relationship with Jean Canouin, or rather, with Wen Shan's lineage, was extremely deep. Regardless of today's events, our fates were already tightly linked. There was indeed no need for too many words of gratitude. If the roles were reversed today, I would do everything that Jean Canouin did without hesitation. After figuring out the mystery, I suddenly remembered what Lu Qingyi said. I asked Jean Canouin if he had a close relationship with Lu Qingyi. This time, Jean Canouin was silent for a moment before nodding his head. He told me that when he was young, he came to the capital to make a living and met Lu Qingyi. The two of them were very close. At the time, Lu Qingyi was a bit older than him and had a much higher cultivation. Lu Qingyi had once given Zhang Canwen some pointers and was of great help to him. Zhang Canwen didn't wait for me to reply and shook his head. It's all in the past. Now, the Lu family and I are mortal enemies. Lu Qingyi is the same. I saw that he wasn't in a good mood and didn't want to talk about this, so I didn't say anything else. The rest of the journey was very peaceful. A few days ago, I was a little worried that the Lu family would come after us. However, in the following days, we followed the spirit snake and crossed the mountains. We walked on small, remote roads. Not to mention Lu Qingyi, even if the patriarch of the Lu family came, he wouldn't be able to find us. Gradually I relaxed. After I had calmed down, I recalled what Lu Qingyi had told me before he left. I still felt strange. From his actions, I guessed he was telling the truth. He didn't come to Shenzhen to find Zhang Canwen or me. He came here for something else. However, he was the legitimate son of the patriarch of the Lu family, and he had the Heavenly Master Realm cultivation base. If the Lu family sent him here, something big must have happened. I had been in Shenzhen for a long time. If I wanted to talk about something big, it would be the half-completed True Dragon Vein and the terrifying Jing Ghost. However, the Han family had occupied the True Dragon Vein, and the Jing Ghost wasn't someone Lu Qingyi could deal with. Even if he could, he wouldn't help the Han family. Why did he come to Shenzhen? After thinking for a long time, I couldn't figure it out. However, I was a little worried. I felt that this matter had something to do with me. With this worry in my heart, we traveled for 2 more days. Finally, we arrived at the ancient capital, Luoyang. The place where the spirit snake turned into a dragon was outside the ancient capital, Luoyang. It was on the Dragon Gate mountain by the Yi River. According to legends, the Dragon Gate was built when Yu the Great conquered the flood. According to the ancient books, the mountain where Yu dug the Dragon Pass was called the Dragon Gate. Many people thought that the Dragon Gate was in Shaanxi's Pingyuan County or the neighboring Shaanxi's Hejin County on the Yellow River. However, no matter if it was in the ancient books, the place where Yu the Great dug the Dragon Gate or the carp turned into a dragon, they were all outside the ancient capital, Luoyang. In the Tang dynasty, the immortal of poetry, Li Bai, once wrote a poem. The 3-foot carp of the Yellow River lives in Mengjin. Once it touches its forehead, it doesn't become a dragon. Since the Dragon Gate mountain was located in the southern suburbs of Luoyang, we didn't have a chance to enter the ancient capital. We first went along the Yi River to the Dragon Gate Mountain National Forest Park. The Dragon Gate Mountain was divided into 2 mountains, the east and the west. The East Mountain was also called the Fragrant Mountain. During the Tang dynasty, Bai Juyi lived in seclusion there. He called himself the Fragrant Mountain Hermit. The West Mountain of the Dragon Gate was called Yi Quebec. The most famous of the 4 great grottos in China, the Dragon Gate Grotto, was located on the West Mountain of the Dragon Gate. When we arrived at the Dragon Gate Grotto, we couldn't drive there. We had to abandon the car and walk. We followed the spirit snake and walked along the Yi River. There were many tourists on the way. Xiao Jin's appearance was different from ordinary people. Since ancient times, Luoyang had always been a place with many cultivators. To prevent any accidents, I took Xiao Jin with me. We avoided the tourists and took a detour to enter the undeveloped area of the Dragon Gate Mountain. Then, I used the aura of the spirit snake to wait for him in the mountain. At the same time, to ensure the spirit snake's safety, Zhang Canwen continued to follow him to protect him. It was better to be safe than sorry. With all kinds of precautions, the spirit snake and I met up at the Dragon Gate Mountain. Then, we continued to go to the Dragon Gate Mountain. Along the way, the serpent spirit had been advancing along the Yi River. When they arrived at Dragon Gate Mountain, the Yi River also branched out into a tributary that circled around Dragon Gate Mountain and flowed upward, forming a small lake halfway up the mountain. In the ancient legend of the carp transforming into a dragon, the Yi River was blocked by the Dragon Gate Mountain. It formed a big lake at the foot of the mountain. At the same time, the Dragon Gate mountain formed a waterspout. The carp transforming into a dragon was to jump over the entire Dragon Gate mountain from the waterspout and transform into a dragon. Thus, when the carp transformed into a dragon, it didn't jump over a gate called the Dragon Gate, but the entire Dragon Gate mountain. Nowadays, even the ownership of the Dragon Gate had become the object of contention between Shangxi and Shangxi. Naturally, no one went to the Dragon Gate mountain to search for the ruins of the ancient Yi River or the waterspout. If I were to search for it now, it would be impossible for me to find it on this barren mountain. However, the serpent spirit seemed to be able to sense it. It led us along the tributary of the Yi River and arrived at the lake halfway up the mountain. The serpent spirit had no intention of stopping to rest at all. It continued to move forward, and this time, it did not continue to float in the air. Instead, it landed in the small lake. It had been maintaining a steady speed along the way, and finally there was a change. The serpent spirit seemed to have finally woken up. It swung its tail at an extremely fast speed in the lake. It did not use its yin qi. Instead, it seemed to be relying purely on its physical strength. It turned into a black stream of light and rushed toward the steep and exposed rock wall on the other side of the lake. Chapter 342. There were many thresholds on the path of cultivation. For example, the dragon-seeking and acupuncture points realm, or the glorious knowledge realm. Every small realm was also a threshold. In the face of these thresholds, every cultivator had to put in a lot of effort in order to be lucky enough to cross over. And all the previous thresholds added up together were not as high as the threshold to advance to the Heavenly Master realm. Actually, it was not too appropriate to say that. To be more precise, all the thresholds added up together were not even 1/10,000th of the threshold to the Heavenly Master realm. It was even more so for spirits and monsters. There were two types of Heavenly Masters. One was the Yang God Heavenly Master and the other was the Yin God Heavenly Master. It sounded like the difference between Yin and Yang, but in reality, there was a fundamental difference. There was a saying in the Death Scripture, the Yang spirit is the righteous path, and the Yin spirit is the side path. The righteous path seeks immortals, and the side path falls to the mortal world. Yin souls like Tong Tong and Red Shadow had already lost their heavenly souls. In this lifetime, they could only condense Yin spirits and become Yin God Heavenly Masters. For humans who were favored by the heavens, once they successfully pushed open the door to the Great Way, they would be able to condense the Yang spirit and become a Yang God Celestial Master. Even if they could not push open the door to the Great Way, as long as they could push open a small gap, they could choose to abandon their physical body and heavenly soul and form a Yin spirit. From this alone, it could be seen that the Yin spirit and the Yang spirit were more than 1,000 miles apart. In the 3 realms and 6 Tao, other than the Asura in the human world and the evil spirits in the netherworld, there was another Tao called the Beast Tao. In a narrow sense, it referred to the spirits and monsters in the world. Gremlins were different from humans and ghosts. Gremlins were not born with 3 souls like humans, nor were they deprived of their heavenly souls like ghosts. They were born without a heavenly soul. Stupid animals only knew how to muddle through, but intelligent gremlins knew how to imitate humans and cultivate arduously. However, their cultivation was not to pursue the great Tao, but to pursue perfection. They sought perfection, and that was the perfection of their 3 souls. To these beasts, they were born with abilities that surpassed ordinary people. After the 3 souls were perfected, their abilities were greatly enhanced, and their strength was no weaker than that of humans. More importantly, after completing the 3 souls, they would no longer be animals, but humans. In a sense, becoming an adult was the beginning of spiritual cultivation. Only by becoming an adult could one talk about the great Tao. For the serpent spirit, transforming into a dragon was the process of becoming an adult. In the beginning, when the spirit snake had told me about the dragon transformation, it had specifically told me that the process of dragon transformation was to break through the shackles of heaven and earth. Whether it succeeded or not, it would be decided by the laws of heaven and earth. Outsiders couldn't help him, and he could only rely on himself. If others rashly interfered, then not only would it be of no benefit to him, it would also be easy for him to incur the wrath of the heavens. That's why I came with him on this trip, just to escort him on the road and to be a witness. At this moment, the serpent spirit was heading toward Quebec. I didn't have the thought of helping him. I just brought Jean Canwen and Xiao Jin to the lake and found a high mountain wall. I sat down and observed while praying for the serpent spirit's blessings. The speed of the snake spirit was getting faster and faster. When it neared the mountain wall, its body had already turned into a black stream of light. According to my original plan, the spirit serpent should be like an airplane, speeding along the runway until it reached a critical speed. Then, it would raise its head and soar into the sky, crossing over Mount Quebec. However, the spirit serpent didn't do that. It seemed it hadn't woken up from its stupor. Its speed was as fast as light. When it reached the mountain wall, it didn't raise its head. Instead, it lowered its head and bumped into the mountain wall. I furrowed my eyebrows and resisted the urge to ask. I asked Jean Canwen, who was beside me, but I didn't get an answer. I could only helplessly continue to watch. The spirit serpent didn't do anything surprising. It directly bumped into the mountain wall. Since it was an ethereal soul, its body wouldn't shatter. However, what happened next was beyond my expectation. After the spirit serpent hit the mountain wall, it didn't shatter. Instead, it bounced back at a faster speed. It looked like an old tree that had struck a bell. At the same time, the mountain wall reverberated with a loud bell ring. The sound was so loud that it was scary. Since it was a peak nearby, and there was no mountain wall to block it, the sound didn't reverberate. It just spread far away. I stood up and checked the spirit serpent's body from a distance. It seemed it was okay. Then I sat back down. At this moment, the spirit serpent moved again. It dashed forward again, but this time, it was even faster than before. Its target was still the thick mountain wall. I had an absurd thought. Did the spirit serpent not want to cross the Dragon Gate Mountain, but to break it? As soon as I had this thought, I used my eyes to measure the tall peak of the Dragon Gate Mountain. The rock wall that came out of the lake was less than 500 meters high. The solitary peak was flat. The side facing us was a flat rock wall, while the other side was an elliptical rock wall. The thickness of the central part was almost 100 meters. After measuring the thickness of the mountain wall, I wasn't optimistic about the spirit serpent's chances. Not to mention him, even if the heavenly master of the Han family and Yen Nantian joined hands, they wouldn't be able to break this mountain wall. The spirit serpent had flown all the way here. At this moment, it would be more realistic to fly 500 meters above the mountain wall. The spirit snake obviously did not think so. It hit the mountain wall for the second time. This time, it sprinted even faster. After it hit the mountain wall, the sound of the bell was naturally louder. Even the surface of the lake below was shaken to the point that there were slight ripples. Just like the first time, the spirit serpent's body was still tough. It looked like nothing had happened to him. Thus, he exerted his strength for the third time and continued to hit the mountain wall. This time, he turned into a black line as soon as he moved. His speed was much faster. When the bell rang for the third time, a big ripple appeared on the lake. The ripple covered half of the lake before it slowly disappeared. The spirit serpent didn't seem satisfied with the ripple. He didn't make any adjustments and hit the mountain wall for the fourth time. This time, the ripple was bigger, and the ripples eventually covered the entire lake. It seemed the spirit serpent was satisfied with the result. After he bounced back, he paused for a while. Right when I was about to exhale in relief, he dashed forward for the fifth time. There were no mountains around, but I could hear the echoing sound wave. My ears buzzed. I didn't know why the little zombie lifted his head to look at the lone peak of the Dragon Gate mountain in the distance. His face was frightened. He slowly moved and hid behind me. Zhang Canwen also frowned. I didn't need to ask to know that he was as puzzled as I was. Only Xiao Jin opened his eyes curiously. He seemed to think that the situation in front of him was fun. The louder the bell rang, the farther the spirit serpent was sent flying. This time, he was sent flying to the edge of the lake. He curled up and didn't move anymore. I stood up and covered my eyes with my hand. After a long time, I confirmed that the spirit serpent's body hadn't collapsed yet. A few minutes later, the spirit serpent moved again. Looking at his fiercely swaying tail, I knew he wasn't going to do anything new this time. He was going to hit the mountain wall for the 6th time. If he didn't die the first 5 times, I guess the 6th time wouldn't be a big problem. I comforted myself and sat down. Just as I had guessed, the spirit serpent was okay after hitting the mountain wall for the 6th time. However, the sound was louder this time. He bounced back further and rested for a longer time. After he rested enough, he started to hit the mountain wall for the 7th time. When I was sure that he wanted to break the west mountain of the Dragon Gate, he finally stopped. He rested for a while by the lake. Then, he wagged his tail and slithered to the surface of the lake like an ordinary snake. He arched his head and looked at the sky. Then, he didn't move anymore. I turned around and counted. The spirit serpent had hit the mountain wall 9 times, which made the bell ring 9 times. Each time was louder than the last. The last bell ring still echoed in my ears. What did it mean to ring the bell 9 times? I hadn't figured it out yet. Before I could think about it, a voice came from the top of the Dragon Gate mountain in front of the spirit serpent. At the beginning of time, who preached the Tao? How could one test it when the top and bottom were not formed? Who could reach the peak of Ming Zhao and Bian? How could Feng Yi recognize him? My face changed. The spirit serpent had told me that turning into a dragon was the judgment of heaven and earth. Why did I hear a human's voice? Chapter 343. Ascend to the Heavens? I hadn't woken up from the shock of seeing an old Taoist. I was bewildered when I heard what he said. The difference between a heavenly master and a mortal was like the difference between the clouds and the mud. However, using the word ascend to the heavens to describe it was a bit exaggerated, especially since the one who said it was an old Taoist. To Taoists, only those who could ascend to the heavens could ascend to the heavens. I was just mumbling to myself. However, the old Taoist turned to look at me. He swung the horsetail whisk in his hand and sneered, "To this hairless animal, getting rid of its animal body and becoming a human is no different from ascending to the heavens. It's ascending to the heavens." I nodded and didn't say anything. I was still a little skeptical about the old Taoist's identity. The old Taoist didn't bother with me anymore. His eyes returned to the snake spirit. After watching for a while, he seemed to be interested. He said, "You hairless animal, you're lucky. You've given up your body, so you must have shed your snake shell. Today you won't have to suffer. All right, since you've rung the sky bell and shed your mortal body, I'll give you a chance to leap through the Dragon Gate." As soon as he finished talking, he raised the horsetail whisk in his left hand and raised his right hand. His index finger pointed at the snake spirit. His long white beard and eyebrows fluttered even though there was no wind. His mouth made a thunderous sound as he spat out 8 words. "Hidden dragon enters the sea, true dragon ascends to the heavens." He spoke very slowly, and each word was like the ringing of a bell. It wasn't any weaker than the sound of the snake spirit hitting the mountain wall. Not only that, but after he finished reciting these words, a fist-sized crystal-clear seal suddenly appeared on his fingertip. When the seal appeared, it was just as the old Taoist finished reciting the 8 characters. But after the seal appeared, there seemed to be an echo in the air. The voice of "Hidden Dragon enters the sea, dragon rises to heaven" appeared again. The seal also emitted a light-colored airflow that was like a wind. It flew swiftly from top to bottom and landed on the head of the snake spirit. Then it disappeared. Seeing this, I was even more shocked. I blurted out, "Righteous bestowal." According to the legends, when spirits became immortals, they needed to be bestowed righteous bestowal by a virtuous person. The so-called righteous bestowal was a kind of recognition that spirits had to experience on their path of cultivation. If a spiritual monster wanted to become a human, it would need the approval of a human. Similarly, if a spiritual monster wanted to become an immortal, it would also need the approval of an immortal. There had always been such a saying in the metaphysical world. I had heard of it before, but the snake spirit had never mentioned it to me. I didn't know much about it, so I didn't think about it. Until now, when I saw the old Taoist priest's action, I suddenly understood. The seal that appeared on the old Taoist's fingertip was sparkling and translucent. It did not look like an ordinary object, but in reality, it was the Heavenly Master's seal. When every cultivator entered the Heavenly Master realm, a strand of Tao Qi would be separated from their body. After being tempered, it would gradually form a stamp-like object. On the surface, it looked similar, but in reality, every celestial master's seal was different. According to legend, when demons were bestowed with the righteous bestowal, they needed to have the Heavenly Master's seal before they could act. This is also the reason why I didn't help the snake spirit even though I knew about the righteous bestowment. Neither I nor the people around me have reached the Celestial Master realm. Naturally, we don't have the Celestial Master seal. With the Taoist Master's seal as proof and his words as proof, this was the recognition of a virtuous person towards a monster. This was the so-called righteous bestowal. With this recognition, the snake spirit would have the foundation to transform into a dragon. Although I was curious about the simple righteous bestowal, I wasn't that shocked. What really shocked me were the words that the old Taoist said. When the snake spirit transformed into a dragon, it wasn't a real dragon but a flood dragon. A flood dragon wasn't a real dragon. To put it nicely, it was just a hidden dragon. Compared to the Heavenly Master realm, a real dragon was an existence equal to a golden immortal of the great all-embracing heaven. The snake spirit had a long way to go before it could reach that level. Thus, for the old Taoist to grant it the righteous bestowal, the words "hidden dragon descends to the sea" were enough. The last 4 words "true dragon ascends to heaven" were needed for the flood dragon to transform into a real dragon. The flood dragon needed the righteous bestowal from an immortal to have an effect. Let's not talk about whether the snake spirit needed the last 4 words to grant it the righteous bestowal or not. This old Taoist just talked about a real dragon. Could he be a true immortal? The old Taoist had suddenly appeared in the dragon transformation ceremony that required heaven and earth's judgment. It was really mysterious. From this point, he seemed to be a true immortal that could use the judgment power on behalf of heaven and earth. However, after thinking about it for a while, I rejected this thought. I didn't care about anything else. Just by looking at the Heavenly Master seal in his hand, I knew he wasn't an immortal. Since he had the Heavenly Master seal, he was just a Heavenly Master. I didn't know the cultivation base of an immortal, but status and power always complemented each other. This was the truth of the world. If he wasn't an immortal, the 4 words "true dragon ascends to heaven" shouldn't have any effect on him. I didn't know why he had added the extra words. I was puzzled, so I lowered my voice and discussed with Zhang Canwen. Zhang Canwen was from Mount Wen, and he had a 1,000-year inheritance. He knew more about these things. After listening to him, I knew that the extra words were actually a good karma that the old Taoist had formed with the snake spirit. Of course, the Heavenly Master realm couldn't confer righteous bestowal to the snake spirit when it turned into a true dragon. However, today was the day when the snake spirit turned into a flood dragon. According to Zhang Kanwen, on the day when the flood dragon turned into a flood dragon, even if an ordinary person called him a dragon, he would still have a weak righteous bestowal. Although the extra words the old Taoist had said couldn't really confer righteous bestowal to the snake spirit, they could still help him in his future journey. Of course, the old Taoist wasn't just being kind. In fact, conferring righteous bestowal to either a snake or a flood dragon would bring him a great fortune. With the old Taoist's cultivation base, he didn't care about the good fortune of conferring righteous bestowal to the snake spirit. However, conferring righteous bestowal to the flood dragon would bring him extraordinary fortune. With the extra words he had said today, if the snake spirit had a chance to turn into a true dragon and ascend to heaven, the old Taoist would be able to receive good karma. After understanding this, I felt happy. It wasn't because the old Taoist had shown his kindness to the snake spirit. It was because the old Taoist's friendly attitude proved that he was optimistic about the snake spirit's success in transforming into a flood dragon. Otherwise, the old Taoist wouldn't have needed to waste his energy on a snake spirit that he didn't think highly of. This discovery made me relax a lot. I was interested to see what the snake spirit would do next. After the power of conferring righteous bestowal fell on the snake spirit's head, it seemed it couldn't digest it. It floated quietly on the lake for a long time. Around the time it takes an incense stick to burn, it finally moved again. It was similar to how it had prepared to hit the mountain wall. This time, the snake spirit crazily wagged its tail and prepared to dash forward. However, this time, it didn't crazily hit the wall like a fool. Just as I had expected, after it had dashed forward for a while, it straightened its body and soared into the sky. It looked like it was going to leap through the Dragon's Gate. That was right. No matter how I looked at it, jumping from a 100-meter-tall mountain peak was much more reliable than crashing into the mountain wall. Instinctively, I clenched my fists. As the snake spirit soared higher, I furrowed my brows and encouraged it in silence. It was true that leaping through the Dragon's Gate was more reliable than crashing into the Dragon's Gate. However, before it could fly, it was an impossible challenge for any creature. I didn't know if the snake spirit was confident enough. Anyway, I wasn't sure. However, I soon found that I was wrong. The snake spirit wasn't like what I had imagined. It seemed it could fly. I didn't know how much power it could provide by wagging its tail above the lake. However, the snake spirit's body soared higher and higher at a fast speed. It didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. When I was a kid, I used to throw pebbles into the sky. I knew that the pebbles would slow down. When they stopped, the pebbles would fall to the ground. From this point of view, it seemed the snake spirit could really fly. Metaphysics couldn't go against the laws of physics. It only took around 10 seconds to jump 100 meters. As I watched, the snake spirit reached the same height as the Dragon's Gate mountain. Then, it slowly stopped and glided forward. Eventually, it fell toward the old Taoist at the peak of the mountain. Did it succeed? Did it just jump through the Dragon's Gate? I held my breath and opened my eyes wide. I didn't even blink as I watched the snake spirit. If it wanted to transform into a flood dragon, something strange would happen if it succeeded. The truth was beyond my expectations. When the snake spirit landed in front of the old Taoist, I looked at it. The snake spirit still looked the same. Its body was still short and there were no changes. There were no horns on its head. Did it succeed or not? Chapter 344. If a person wanted to express something, it was best to say it out loud. However, I stared at the old Taoist's thin lips for a long time and didn't see them move. Quite the contrary, I lifted my head and saw something in the old Taoist's eyes. To be precise, it was the spot between the old Taoist's eyebrows. The old Taoist used to look calm and dignified, but now, his glabella had the character for Chuan. His calm and solemn face was gone. He gazed at the serpent spirit, and his eyes seemed to be angry. The snow-white horsetail whisk in his hand swung, and the silver strands tore through the air and lashed at the serpent's spirit like whips. The serpent's spirit didn't have time to react. He fell from the mountain peak and fell into the lake. Although he was just a soul, after being nourished by Xiang Lu's blood, his body had already gained weight. He fell to the bottom of the lake, then floated up to the surface of the lake. He raised his head and looked at the old Taoist priest on top of the mountain with a confused face. At first, I thought that this could be a way for the old Taoist to test the serpent spirit. However, after seeing his lost eyes, I understood. The serpent spirit failed. In other words, the old Taoist didn't want the serpent spirit to succeed. The serpent spirit had jumped to the top of the mountain, but the old Taoist had used his horsetail whisk to send him back to the mortal world. This result was the complete opposite of the kindness that the old Taoist had expressed at the beginning. The resentful expression on his face and his resolute attitude reminded me of the solar eclipse that I had heard in the Metaphysics Society's back mountain during the solar eclipse. I remembered the cold and heartless words that I had heard. Wisdom can cross the river. Ignorance can cross the river. Sages can cross the river. Bandits can cross the river. Butchers can cross the river. Dogs can cross the river. You can't cross the river. The serpent spirit's fate seemed to have overlapped with mine. It was a strange thought, but I didn't need to think about it for long before I believed it. I couldn't help but feel angry. I lifted my head and gazed at the old Taoist. I wanted to get an answer from him. However, the old Taoist priest didn't say a word. He just flicked the horsetail whisk in his hand and turned around, as if he was about to leave. I didn't know what the spirit snake was thinking, but I couldn't hide my anger anymore. I took a deep breath and lifted my head to look at the old Taoist priest's back. I asked loudly, "You haven't turned into a dragon yet. Why did you leave?" Upon hearing my voice, the old Taoist priest retracted his left foot that had just been lifted. He turned around and glanced at the snake's spirit before looking at me. He replied calmly, "I left because the snake soul's cultivation was not complete. It has no fate with the great Tao. Could it be that you have something to say to me?" Facing a celestial master, I naturally didn't dare to say anything, but I couldn't swallow this anger. After remaining silent for a while, I immediately opened my mouth again. The spirit snake had already leaped to the peak of the mountain. "You were the one who struck him down. Leaping through the dragon gate is a good fortune bestowed by the heavens to the monsters. Why do you want to obstruct it?" The old Taoist priest didn't get angry. He nodded calmly. "You're right. Leaping through the dragon gate is a good fortune bestowed by the heavens. However, whether those animals can leap through the dragon gate or not, it's up to me to decide." His words were really arrogant. I kept silent for a while, then asked in a hoarse voice, "How can the laws of heaven and earth be decided by a man's words?" When the old Taoist priest heard me, he laughed. "Heaven and earth are silent, but the will of heaven and earth needs to be conveyed. Man is the leader of all spirit. It's not up to a man's words to decide. Do you want those animals to decide for themselves?" I opened my mouth, but I couldn't say anything. The old Taoist priest continued, "Leaping through the Dragon Gate isn't just about the Dragon Gate Mountain, but also the Dragon Gate Temple on the Dragon Gate Mountain." I didn't understand. "Where's the Dragon Gate Temple?" The old Taoist priest flicked the horsetail whisk in his hand again. "I'm the Dragon Gate Temple. The Dragon Gate Temple has been in charge of the transformation of the monsters in this world for tens of thousands of years." My heart was instantly hit by a storm. Monsters transforming into dragons was such a mysterious matter, and it had always been managed by a human. It was impossible. The serpent spirit had said that after he successfully transformed into a dragon, he would be able to transform into a human, and his power would reach the heavenly master realm. Besides the heavens, I didn't believe that anyone could turn a snake into a flood dragon. Moreover, He could transform into a human with the power of a heavenly master. Even if there was, it couldn't be the old Taoist priest at the heavenly master realm. I was skeptical, but the old Taoist priest didn't care. He didn't want to talk more. He flicked his horsetail whisk and turned around to leave. I became anxious. When my Tao energy encountered the heavenly barrier, I could still choose to use my shaman energy. However, if the serpent spirit couldn't overcome this obstacle today, he would never be able to transform into a flood dragon. I gritted my teeth and decided to take the risk to call the old Taoist priest again. Even if I couldn't change his mind, I had to figure out why the serpent spirit couldn't transform into a flood dragon. However, before I could open my mouth, a beast roared from the lake in front of me. At first, it wasn't loud, but soon it became louder. I hurried to lower my head to check. The sound wave made the lake water splash as if it was boiling. I couldn't see the serpent spirit anymore. Did the serpent spirit make that sound? I guessed it was just venting its anger. I didn't have time to think about it. I was still thinking about the old Taoist priest. As soon as I lifted my head, I saw that the old Taoist priest had turned around and was looking down at the water. His face looked even more solemn than before. However, this time, besides his solemn expression, he looked doubtful and anxious. It seemed something terrifying was hiding in the water. I didn't understand. The old Taoist priest's doubtful expression wasn't because of the serpent spirit. Not to mention the fact that the old Taoist priest had a heavenly master realm cultivation base. He wouldn't put the serpent spirit in his eyes. From his words, I could see that the serpent spirit was just a beast in his eyes. It was like an ant. Of course, he wouldn't look so serious. Is there something else in the lake? I didn't care if there was something else, as long as it didn't hurt the serpent spirit. I hurriedly opened my mouth to call for the snake spirit to come back. However, after calling a few times, I didn't get any response from the snake spirit. The water splashed even higher on the lake's surface. The beast's roar didn't stop. Instead, it became more and more intense, faintly resembling a dragon's roar. We're in the Dragon's Gate. Is there a beast that has turned into a dragon? It was said that beasts were savage by nature, especially among their own kind. Once they met, they would tear each other apart and kill each other. Furthermore, some of the more powerful beasts would swallow other weaker beasts alive. It was said that this could increase their cultivation. Looking at the commotion in the lake, I knew that the roaring beast wasn't someone to be trifled with. It was at least at the heavenly master realm. It was fine that the serpent spirit hadn't turned into a dragon, but it shouldn't be swallowed like an appetizer. I turned to look at Zhang Canwen. He still had many pages of the Song of Righteousness. Even if he provoked the big fellow in the lake, Zhang Canwen could resist it for a while. I gritted my teeth and didn't dare to use my shaman energy in front of the old Taoist. I took out the yin and yang yama brush and used my Tao energy. Then, I waved my hand and a flow of Tao energy flew out like a fan. It cut the splashing water on the lake's surface, revealing the situation underneath. I focused and saw that it wasn't much different from what I had imagined. There was a giant black python lying on the surface of the lake. From the short horn on the python's forehead, it wasn't appropriate to call it a python. It should be called a flood dragon. The lake at the foot of the Dragon's Gate mountain was located halfway up the mountain. There were no glaciers on the mountain, so it didn't cover a large area. It was a bit exaggerated to call it a lake. It was more appropriate to call it a pool. The black flood dragon's body was huge. Its body was still entrenched in the water, and it had almost filled the entire pool. It was still roaring and didn't care about my action of cutting the water. It didn't care about me, so naturally I didn't care about it. I quickly looked around, wanting to fish the serpent spirit out. I was at the middle stage of the glorious memory realm, so my spirit sense was abnormally sharp. Not to mention the small pool in front of me, even if it was a large lake, as long as the location was suitable, I would be able to search through it in a few seconds. I wouldn't miss anything. However, what was weird was that after I scanned the surface of the lake, apart from the black flood dragon, there wasn't anything else in the lake. I couldn't find the serpent spirit anywhere. Could it be that the serpent spirit had been swallowed by the black flood dragon? I shook my head and rejected that thought. Although the serpent spirit didn't show itself normally, it wasn't an ordinary being. I could understand that it couldn't defeat the flood dragon, but it was impossible for it to be swallowed without making a sound. Chapter 345. After thinking about this possibility, I became excited. I tried to call the black flood dragon to confirm it. However, after calling several times, the black flood dragon ignored me. It lifted its head and roared at the old Taoist. After 5 minutes, the black flood dragon finally calmed down. Its giant body curled into a ball as if it was tired. At this moment, I called out again. The black flood dragon finally heard my voice. It turned its head and looked at me with its 2 large black eyes. It seemed to be at a loss. Looking at its eyes, I confirmed that it was the serpent spirit. When Nangong brought the serpent spirit back to me on Mount Huangguan, the serpent spirit's body had changed greatly. It had turned into a small snake. It was said that the old witch from Yunnan had fed it a venomous insect spirit to help it shed its snake body. However, before that, the serpent spirit was a big black snake. Every time it looked at me, it looked exactly the same. It gave me a strong sense of familiarity. However, when I saw the serpent spirit's blank face, I was a little nervous. Fortunately, after a few seconds, the blank look in the serpent spirit's eyes disappeared. It looked happy. It craned its head from a distance and came close to me, rubbing its head against my body. I could finally relax. It seemed the transformation didn't affect the serpent spirit too much. At least, its memory hadn't changed. It still remembered who I was. While I was feeling happy, the serpent spirit lifted its head one more time. Its coiled body spread out, and its tail propped itself on the water surface. Its giant body stood on its hind legs, and it was as tall as the Dragon Gate mountain. Its big head looked at the old Taoist on the mountain peak. Its red mouth parted, but it didn't bite. Instead, it quacked like a duck. "Old ox, your grandpa snake. No, your grandpa dragon was born to be a dragon. You damn ox, you dared to hit your grandpa dragon off the mountain. Ha, so what? Didn't your grandpa dragon successfully transform into a dragon? If you have the guts, why don't you hit your grandpa dragon again? Hit me! Hit me!" This fellow had become a flood dragon, but his cheap temper did not change. As he spoke, he even moved his big head closer to the old Taoist at the top of the mountain, looking like he was not stingy at all. I understood how he felt. What he had been pursuing his whole life was denied by someone else. That kind of resentment. At this moment, he was just complaining a little. It was already kind. If it were me, I might even want to destroy the entire Taoist master's sect. However, the snake spirit had just successfully transformed into a dragon, so its strength was probably not a match for the old Taoist. It would be troublesome if the old Taoist really made a move on it with such an arrogant look. I was worried, but the old Taoist didn't seem to hear me. Although he was looking at the snake, his mind wasn't there. The snake spirit scolded him for a long time, but the old Taoist didn't budge. Perhaps he felt bored. Eventually, the snake spirit let go of the old Taoist. It left the lake and went to the shore. Then, it lay down next to Zhang Canwen and me. At this moment, the Taoist at the top of the mountain sighed. His eyes moved away from the snake spirit and lowered his head to look at his right hand. Then, he lifted his head to look at the empty sky. He said, "I thought that if an animal could transform into a dragon, it would have to go through my dragon point brush. I didn't expect that all living things would have their own destiny. However, if the heavens didn't allow it, how could it have such a destiny?" I lifted my head to look. The Taoist was holding a scarlet wolf hairbrush that was half a foot long in his right hand. It looked similar to the Inyang Yama brush in my hand. From what he said, it should be the dragon point brush. Could it be that the Taoist said that he could control the animals in this world and turn them into dragons through this scarlet dragon point brush? While I was thinking, the Taoist waved the horsetail whisk in his left hand and put away the dragon point brush. The puzzled expression on his face disappeared a little, and he sighed again. Forget it. If you're not in the right position, you don't need to worry about the right things. You little snake, since you have such a destiny, I'll help you. You just need to remember that after you transform into a dragon, you need to control the evil energy in your heart. You need to calm your mind and cultivate to reach the great path. If you run amok and cause trouble in this world, the dragon point brush in my hand will be enough to send you to the mortal world. At first, he sighed with emotion, but later, he stared at the snake spirit and scolded it. The snake spirit was a clever fellow. Just now it was angry and cursing. However, when it saw the Taoist's stern face, it lowered its head and didn't say a word. It made people feel that it was very respectful. However, the Taoist didn't want it to answer. After scolding it, he turned around and floated away. His figure disappeared from the mountain peak. After he left, the snake spirit lifted its head and laughed. Then, it said excitedly to Zhang Kanwen and me with its hoarse voice, "I succeeded in transforming into a dragon. Haha, I succeeded in transforming into a dragon." Zhang Kanwen didn't have much contact with the snake spirit. When he saw the snake spirit's unrestrained appearance, he was surprised and looked at me. I angrily reached out and patted the snake spirit's head. "All right, I know you succeeded in transforming into a dragon. It's strange. Although you used to be annoying, your voice wasn't that bad. Why do you sound like a duck quacking now?" When the snake spirit heard my analogy, it got angry. "Who quacked like a duck? Who quacked like a duck?" Grandpa Snake. "No, Grandpa Dragon, it's because I've reconstructed my body. I'm not familiar with the structure of my body yet." "Even so, Grandpa Dragon's voice is a dragon's roar. How can it be a duck's quacking?" I relaxed after he successfully transformed into a dragon. I found it funny. Just as I was about to joke with him, I suddenly remembered that he was talking about reconstructing his body. I quickly lifted my head and looked at his 100-meter-long body. Then, I extended my hand and pressed on his body. As expected, it was completely different from the previous phantom body. The snake spirit's current body was real. I couldn't stay calm anymore. "You really reconstructed your body, but you're so big now. How are you going to follow me? If I bring you along, I'm afraid I'll scare a lot of people." When the snake spirit heard that, his huge snake face was filled with disdain. He immediately said, "Snake, Grandpa Dragon will teach you a lesson. Watch carefully." As soon as he said that, the fellow's huge body disappeared. I lowered my head to take a look and discovered that he had actually turned into a small snake that was as thick as a chopstick. He looked much more exquisite, especially the horn on his head that had just started to bulge out, making him look rather cute. However, his voice didn't change much. It was still the same quacking of a duck. He chuckled and said, "Changing size is just a common divine power. You're someone who's about to become a heaven master, but you're so shallow." I gritted my teeth. Today was his big day of transforming into a dragon. I'd let him be smug for a while. I'd better not call Tong Tong out. The snake spirit didn't have any intention of restraining himself. He leaped up and landed on my shoulder. He pointed his tail at my back and said, "Plus, don't you have the ink dragon drawing on your back? I can still possess you. I don't know what you're worried about." Then, his body sank down and he disappeared on my shoulder. At the same time, his hoarse voice appeared in my head again. "All right, Grandpa Dragon is tired. Go do whatever you need to do. Grandpa Dragon wants to rest for a while." With that, his voice disappeared completely, as if he had gone to sleep. I wanted to ask him if he had comprehended any new divine powers after transforming into a dragon, but seeing how tired he was, I let him rest. Jean Canwen and I didn't stay for long. After we left the mountain, we headed in the direction of Anyang. It was only a 1 to 2 days journey from Luoyang to Anyang. Since there was still some time before the spring sacrifice, we weren't in a hurry. We stayed in Luoyang City that night. The next morning, the snake spirit seemed to have rested enough and recovered his energy. He jumped out of the ink dragon drawing and excitedly demonstrated the new divine power that he had obtained after transforming into a flood dragon. I took a look. He could only spit out a black flame. Since his cultivation was still low, the power of the black flame was very ordinary. There wasn't anything surprising about it. However, the snake spirit had said that after transforming into a flood dragon, one's power wouldn't be increased overnight. Instead, he would slowly comprehend more divine powers. I nodded and didn't ask anything else. Instead, I told him about what had happened yesterday. I had a question in my heart. The old Taoist who claimed to be from the Dragon Gate Temple was telling the truth. It seemed that he was in charge of beasts transforming into dragons. However, the snake spirit was the same as when I was in glory of consciousness. He hadn't gotten the old Taoist's approval, but he had succeeded in transforming into a flood dragon. Not only was the old Taoist confused, but even I couldn't understand it. After asking the snake spirit, he didn't seem to care at all. He waved his hand and said, before this, he had already shed his snake body and swallowed the blood of a Xiang Lu. A Xiang Lu is an ancient beast with extraordinary power. Even without the old Taoist's approval, why couldn't he succeed in transforming into a flood dragon? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.